Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin, near the abandoned logging town of Glidden, where the trees grow so thick that noon feels like dusk and the silence stretches like a held breath. I went there to disappear. Not forever, just long enough to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with the wreckage of my life. My wife, Sarah, had left 3 months earlier, taking our daughter Emma and half my soul with her. The divorce papers sat unsigned on my kitchen table next to a bottle of bourbon that was becoming my closest friend. My job at the insurance firm felt like slow strangulation, each day bleeding into the next in a gray haze of claims and cubicles and corporate bullshit that made my teeth ache. So when my buddy Jake mentioned his uncle's old hunting cabin up near the Turtle Flambeau flowage, I jumped at the chance. "Place has been empty for years," Jake had said, scratching his beer belly. "Uncle Pete died last winter, left it to rot. You want to get lost for a week or two, that's your spot. No cell service, no neighbors for miles. Just you and whatever's left of your sanity." The cabin turned out to be more ruin than refuge. A sagging structure of weathered logs and broken dreams that squatted beside a nameless creek like a diseased toad. But it had a roof that mostly held, a stone fireplace that drew smoke properly, and walls thick enough to muffle the sound of a man falling apart. The isolation was absolute. The nearest road was a rutted logging trail that disappeared into brambles and shadow, and beyond that, nothing but endless acres of pine and birch and the kind of silence that made your ears ring. I'd brought enough supplies for 2 weeks: canned goods, jerky, bottled water, and a battery-powered radio that picked up nothing but static and the occasional ghost of a distant station. The plan was simple: hike during the day, drink by the fire at night, and hopefully find some clarity in the spaces between. The first 3 days passed without incident. I explored the web of deer trails that crisscrossed the forest, following frozen streams and scrambling over granite outcroppings worn smooth by 10,000 Wisconsin winters. The exercise felt good, the solitude even better. For the first time in months, the crushing weight in my chest began to ease. I slept deeply and dreamlessly, waking to the sound of wind in the pines and the chatter of red squirrels. But on the 4th night, something changed. I was sitting by the fire, working through my 3rd beer and watching sparks spiral into the darkness, when I heard it. A sound like someone stepping on a pile of dry sticks, sharp and deliberate in the forest beyond the cabin's glow. I froze, beer halfway to my lips, and listened. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by what might have been breathing or might have been wind through dead leaves. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Someone there?" The forest swallowed my words without echo. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs, but heard nothing more. Probably just a deer, I told myself, or a bear. The woods were full of animals, and they'd all be curious about the smoke and firelight. I threw another log on the fire and tried to convince myself that the prickling sensation between my shoulder blades was just paranoia. But sleep wouldn't come that night. Every whisper of wind, every settling timber in the cabin walls, every distant hoot of an owl felt pregnant with menace. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling and trying to shake the feeling that something was watching me through the grimy windows. The 5th day dawned gray and bitter, the sky the color of old pewter. I forced myself to eat breakfast, stale granola bars and instant coffee that tasted like punishment, and headed out for my morning hike. The trail I chose wound north through a stand of ancient white pines, their trunks so massive that 3 men couldn't wrap their arms around them. The forest floor was carpeted with decades of fallen needles, creating a springy surface that muffled my footsteps. I'd hiked maybe 2 miles when I found the first one. It was hanging from a birch tree about 15 feet off the trail. A rabbit, or what was left of one. The animal had been opened from throat to belly, its entrails arranged in careful loops around the lower branches like some nightmare Christmas ornament. The meat was fresh enough that flies still buzzed around the wounds, but there was no blood on the tree trunk or the ground below. Whatever had done this had been precise, methodical, surgical. My stomach lurched and I backed away from the tree, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. Hunters, I told myself. Some sick fuck who thought this was funny. But even as I tried to rationalize it, my primitive brain was screaming warnings. The positioning was too deliberate, too ceremonial. This wasn't the work of a hunter or even a sadistic teenager. This was something else entirely. I turned and hurried back down the trail, my earlier peace shattered like glass. The trees seemed to press closer as I walked, their branches reaching across the path like gnarled fingers. Twice I thought I glimpsed movement in my peripheral vision, but when I spun to look, there was nothing but shadows and silence. Back at the cabin, I tried to lose myself in mundane tasks, organizing supplies, cleaning my gear, feeding the fire, but my mind kept returning to that violated rabbit, to the careful arrangement of its intestines like some twisted offering. I'd grown up hunting with my father in these same woods, had field-dressed dozens of deer and grouse over the years. I knew the difference between predation and ritual, between the messy efficiency of nature and the cold precision of something that thought about its actions. As evening approached, I found myself checking and rechecking the cabin's primitive lock, wedging a chair under the door handle and dragging a heavy wooden chest in front of the single window. The rational part of my mind mocked these precautions. What was I afraid of exactly? But rationality felt thin as paper in this place where shadows moved wrong and silence had weight. I built the fire higher than usual that night, feeding it log after log until the flames roared and danced like something alive. The light pushed back the darkness for maybe 20 feet in every direction, creating a fragile bubble of warmth and visibility in an ocean of black. I sat with my back to the fire, peering into the forest and trying to convince myself that I was alone. That's when I heard it singing. The voice drifted through the trees like smoke, thin and reedy and utterly wrong. It was a child's voice, high and sweet, singing what might have been a lullaby in a language I didn't recognize. The melody rose and fell with the wind, sometimes clear as a bell, sometimes fading to nothing more than a whisper, but always, always coming closer. I grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace, the iron bar heavy and reassuring in my hands. "Who's there?" I shouted into the darkness. "I can hear you. Show yourself." The singing stopped as abruptly as if someone had thrown a switch. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. I waited, muscles coiled and ready, but nothing emerged from the trees. After what felt like hours, I finally allowed myself to relax, chalking it up to wind and stress and too much time alone. But then I heard my daughter's voice. "Daddy?" The word drifted through the forest like a prayer. "Daddy, where are you? I'm scared." My heart stopped. Emma was 300 miles away in Madison, safe in her mother's apartment. But that was her voice, unmistakably her voice, calling to me from the darkness beyond the fire's reach. "Emma?" I called back, my voice breaking. "Baby, is that you?" "I'm lost, Daddy. Everything's dark and I can't find you." I took a step toward the forest, then another, the poker forgotten in my hands. That was my little girl out there, alone and frightened in the wilderness. Nothing else mattered. Not logic, not safety, not the growing certainty that this was all wrong. I had to find her. "Keep talking, sweetheart," I called. "Daddy's coming." I'd made it maybe 10 feet from the fire when the laughter started. It wasn't Emma's laugh. It wasn't even human. The sound bubbled up from the darkness like something boiling over, wet and obscene and full of hunger. The voice that had mimicked my daughter so perfectly dissolved into that awful laughter, and I finally understood what I was dealing with. I turned and ran back to the fire, stumbling over my own feet in my haste. Behind me, the laughter followed, echoing through the trees until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I grabbed an armload of logs and threw them on the fire, sending sparks cascading into the night sky. The flames roared higher, and the laughter faded to nothing more than wind through the pines. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire with the poker across my knees, feeding the flames and trying not to think about the stories my grandfather used to tell. Stories about things that lived in the deep woods. Things that wore familiar faces and spoke with loved ones' voices to lure the unwary into the darkness. Things that were always hungry. The Wendigo, the Windigo, the Wetiko. My grandfather had used different names, but they all meant the same thing. A creature of endless appetite that had once been human but had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They were drawn to isolated places and desperate people, feeding on flesh and despair in equal measure. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I would pack up and leave, get back to civilization and real problems and the mundane horror of divorce papers and empty apartments. Whatever was stalking me in these woods could have its domain back. I wasn't proud enough to stay and face something that could wear my daughter's voice like a mask. But when I went to start my truck, the battery was dead. I'd checked it 3 days earlier, and the engine had turned over without hesitation. Now, the ignition clicked once and fell silent, as if something had drained every volt of power in the night. I popped the hood and found the battery cables corroded green, the terminals eaten away by acid that hadn't been there before. My hands shook as I tried to clean the connections with my multi-tool, but it was useless. Even if I could get the corrosion off, the battery itself was cracked, acid seeping from a hairline fracture that split the plastic case. There was no way this was natural deterioration. Something had done this deliberately, efficiently, trapping me here with surgical precision. I walked the perimeter of the cabin, looking for any sign of intrusion, but found nothing. No footprints in the soft earth, no broken branches or disturbed vegetation. Whatever had sabotaged my truck moved without leaving traces, like a ghost made of hunger and malice. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away down a logging road that was barely passable by truck, much less on foot. I could try to hike out, but that meant traveling through dense forest with whatever was hunting me. At least here I had shelter, fire, and walls between me and the thing that had spoken with Emma's voice. I spent the day reinforcing the cabin, using boards from an old outhouse to cover the windows and dragging fallen logs against the walls. It was probably useless. If the Wendigo wanted in, a few pieces of rotten lumber wouldn't stop it, but the work kept my hands busy and my mind focused on something other than the growing certainty that I was going to die in this place. As the sun sank toward the tree line, painting the sky the color of dried blood, I built another massive fire and settled in to wait. The Wendigo would come again. I was sure of that. The only question was what form it would take, what voice it would use to try and lure me into the darkness. I didn't have to wait long. "Michael!" The voice came from just outside the circle of firelight, soft and familiar and full of pain. "Michael, please, I need you." It was Sarah's voice, my wife's voice, cracked with tears and desperation. "I know you can hear me," she continued. "I know I hurt you, but Emma needs her father. She's sick, Michael, really sick, and the doctors say—" The voice broke into sobs. "Please, baby, I need you to come home." My throat closed. Even knowing what this was, even understanding that my wife was hundreds of miles away and safely divorced from my failure, part of me wanted to believe. Part of me wanted to rush into the darkness and find her, to somehow fix everything that had gone wrong between us. "She's asking for you," Sarah's voice whispered. "Emma keeps asking where Daddy went and why he doesn't love us anymore." That almost broke me. I stood up, taking an involuntary step toward the sound, tears streaming down my face. My daughter hadn't done anything wrong. Whatever sins I'd committed, whatever failures had driven Sarah away, Emma was innocent. If she was really out there, really needed me. But then I heard it. the wet sound of something breathing through a mouth that was too large, too full of teeth. The sound came from the same direction as Sarah's voice, and I realized that whatever was speaking had never stopped breathing while it talked. The human sounds were just another layer over something fundamentally alien, like a radio playing over the growl of a hungry animal. "I know what you are," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You can't have me." The breathing stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear something moving through the underbrush, circling the cabin just beyond the fire's reach. Branches cracked under immense weight, and I caught glimpses of something pale moving between the trees. Too tall to be human, too thin to be alive. "You're hungry, Michael." The voice was different now, neither Sarah's nor Emma's, but something that might have once been human before starvation and madness stripped away everything that mattered. "You've been hungry for so long, empty inside, gnawing at yourself. I can fix that. I can fill the hollow places." The thing was right about the hunger. I'd been empty for months, maybe years, going through the motions of living while something vital slowly died inside me. The divorce, the job, the endless cycle of disappointment and failure. It had all been variations on the same theme of gradual consumption. I was already being eaten alive, just slowly enough not to notice. "Join me," the Wendigo whispered, its voice now coming from directly behind the cabin. "Let me show you what real hunger feels like. Let me teach you how to fill the emptiness." Something scraped against the cabin's rear wall, long and deliberate, like fingernails on wood. The sound continued for several minutes, and when it stopped, I could smell something that made my stomach turn. The sweetly rotten odor of meat left too long in the sun. I threw more logs on the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night. The flames illuminated the trees around me, but instead of comfort, the light revealed shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The Wendigo was out there, just beyond the edge of vision, waiting for me to make a mistake or lose my nerve. Hours passed in tense silence. I fed the fire methodically, keeping it burning bright and hot, and tried to ignore the sounds that drifted through the forest. Footsteps that didn't quite match human rhythm, whispers and voices I almost recognized, the distant sound of something large moving through the trees with predatory patience. Around midnight, the attacks began in earnest. The first came as a shower of stones, baseball-sized rocks that sailed out of the darkness to crash against the cabin walls. They struck with inhuman force, splintering boards and sending vibrations through the floor. I crouched by the fire, poker in hand, as the bombardment continued for nearly 10 minutes. When the stones stopped, the Wendigo tried a more direct approach. Something enormous slammed into the front door, rattling the entire structure and sending the chair I'd wedged underneath skittering across the floor. The impact was followed by a sound like fingernails on glass, long, deliberate scratches running down the length of the door. "Let me in, Michael," it said in my father's voice, my dead father, who'd taught me to hunt in these same woods 20 years ago. "It's cold out here, son. So cold and dark. Just open the door." I wanted to scream, to tell it to stop wearing faces that mattered to me, but I bit down on my tongue until I tasted blood. The Wendigo fed on response, on engagement. The more I reacted, the more power I gave it. The scratching continued, methodical and patient. Through the gaps in the boards covering the windows, I could see something pale pressed against the glass. Not a face exactly, but a suggestion of features stretched over a skull that was too long and too narrow to be human. When it smiled, I saw teeth like broken glass and gums the color of old blood. "I can wait," it whispered. "I've been waiting for so long already. But you'll get tired eventually, Michael. You'll fall asleep, or the fire will die, or you'll just give up. And when you do, I'll be here." The creature was right, and we both knew it. I was already exhausted, running on adrenaline and terror, and my supply of firewood wouldn't last forever. Even if I could stay awake until dawn, there would be another night and another after that. The Wendigo had all the time in the world, and I was trapped here until someone came looking for me, which might be never. But I'd underestimated the creature's impatience. Around 3 in the morning, it stopped trying to get in and started trying to burn me out. The first hint was the smell of smoke that didn't come from my fire, acrid and chemical, like burning plastic. I looked around frantically and saw orange light flickering through the cracks in the boarded windows. The Wendigo had set something on fire outside, probably using matches or a lighter from the truck. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized what was happening. The cabin was old and dry, the logs seasoned by decades of wind and weather. If the exterior caught fire, the entire structure would go up like a torch, and I'd be forced to choose between burning alive and facing the Wendigo in the open. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and I could hear the crackle of flames against the cabin's exterior wall. Through the gaps in the window boards, I saw the Wendigo's silhouette moving back and forth in front of the fire, adding fuel and ensuring the blaze would spread. I had maybe minutes before the cabin became uninhabitable. The smart play would be to stay inside as long as possible, hope the structure held together long enough for dawn to drive the creature away. But as heat began to seep through the walls and smoke started to drift under the door, I realized I didn't have that long. The Wendigo had won. It had forced me to make the choice I'd been dreading all night: face the flames or face the thing that waited in the darkness beyond. I chose the darkness. Gripping the iron poker like a club, I kicked the chair away from the door and yanked it open. Heat and smoke billowed past me as I stumbled outside, and for a moment I was blinded by the contrast between the cabin's dim interior and the hellish orange glow of the fire. The Wendigo was waiting for me. It stood maybe 20 feet away, silhouetted against the flames like something out of a fever dream. The creature was tall, 7 feet at least, and thin to the point of emaciation. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at angles that hurt to look at. What I'd taken for pale skin was actually exposed bone and sinew, stretched over a frame that had been human once but had been reshaped by hunger into something else entirely. The face was the worst part. It had Emma's eyes, my daughter's bright blue eyes, wide with innocence and trust, set in a skull that belonged in a charnel house. When it smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, it was with my father's gentle expression, the same look he'd worn when teaching me to tie fishing knots or field dress a deer. "There you are," it said in Sarah's voice, though the mouth that spoke had no lips, just exposed gums and bone. "I was starting to worry you'd choose the fire over me." I backed against the burning cabin, feeling heat sear through my jacket. The Wendigo took a step closer, its movements fluid and predatory despite the impossible angles of its joints. This close, I could smell it. Not just rot and decay, but something worse. It smelled like starvation, like the empty hollow that opens in your stomach when you haven't eaten for days and food becomes the only thing that matters. "You can still choose," it continued, tilting its head with bird-like curiosity. "The fire will be quick, relatively speaking. Painful, but over in minutes. I, on the other hand..." It smiled wider, showing more teeth than any mouth should hold. I like to take my time. I raised the poker, knowing it was useless but needing to do something, anything besides stand there and wait to die. The Wendigo laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard, and took another step forward. That's when I saw the trees. Behind the Wendigo, the ancient pines that surrounded the cabin had begun to move. Not swaying in the wind, there was no wind, but bending inward like they were watching, like they had opinions about what was happening in their clearing. As I stared, trying to process what I was seeing, I realized the trees weren't moving at all. They were full of people, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, hanging from the branches like the rabbit I'd found on the trail. Men, women, children, all in various stages of decay, all opened and arranged with the same surgical precision. Some were fresh enough that their eyes still tracked movement. Others were little more than bones and sinew, held together by wire and the Wendigo's careful attention to detail. The Wendigo noticed my expression and turned to follow my gaze. When it saw me looking at its collection, it made a sound that might have been approval. "Beautiful, isn't it?" it said, its voice now a mixture of all the people hanging in those trees. Each one is a story, Michael. Each one came here looking for something. Peace, solitude, escape. I gave them what they wanted. I gave them permanence. One of the corpses, a woman in a tattered hiking outfit, turned her head to look at me. Her jaw had been removed, but she still tried to speak, producing only a wet whistle through the hole where her throat used to be. She was a schoolteacher from Milwaukee, the Wendigo said conversationally. Came here after her husband died, wanted to commune with nature or some such nonsense. Very chatty at first, full of stories about her students and her garden. Less talkative after I removed her tongue, but the eyes stayed expressive right until the end. The creature took another step closer, and I pressed harder against the burning cabin. The heat was becoming unbearable, singeing the hair on the back of my neck, but the alternative was worse. "What do you want?" I gasped, smoke making my voice rough. "Want?" The Wendigo laughed again. "I want what I've always wanted, Michael. I want to feed. I want to fill the emptiness that gnaws at me day and night. You understand emptiness, don't you? You've been hollow for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to be full." It was right. Standing there with fire at my back and a monster in front of me, I could feel the void inside me more clearly than ever. The space where love and purpose and meaning used to live before life gradually ate them away. The Wendigo wasn't offering death exactly. It was offering an end to the hunger that had been consuming me from the inside. "I can make it stop," the creature whispered, reading my thoughts. "The pain, the loneliness, the endless gnawing need for something you can't even name. I can fill those empty spaces with something real, something that will never leave you wanting again." I looked into its eyes, Emma's eyes, and saw nothing but ancient hunger wearing a familiar mask. Whatever this thing had been before starvation transformed it, that person was gone. There was only appetite now, endless and patient and utterly without mercy. "No," I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "I choose the fire." The Wendigo's expression changed, the false humanity slipping away to reveal something that had never been human at all. It lunged forward with inhuman speed, claws extended, but I was already moving. Instead of trying to dodge, I threw myself backward into the burning cabin. Pain exploded across my back as flames caught my jacket, but I ignored it. The Wendigo followed me inside, too eager for the kill to consider the trap I'd stumbled into. In the confined space of the cabin, surrounded by burning timber and choking smoke, the creature's size worked against it. It had to crouch to fit through the doorway, and its elongated limbs tangled in the fallen debris. I rolled away from its claws and grabbed a burning log from the fireplace, swinging it like a club. The Wendigo shrieked as the flames touched its exposed flesh, the sound so loud and alien that my ears rang. It stumbled backward, crashing into the wall and bringing down a section of burning roof. "Fire!" I gasped, understanding flooding through me. "You're afraid of fire?" The creature's eyes widened, still Emma's eyes, but filled now with something that might have been fear. It tried to retreat, but I was already moving, grabbing another burning brand and advancing. The Wendigo backed toward the door, its earlier confidence replaced by something almost like panic. "Fire cleanses," I said, remembering my grandfather's stories. "Fire purifies. Fire burns away the hunger and leaves nothing behind." I swung the burning log again, and this time I connected solidly with the Wendigo's torso. Flames spread across its desiccated flesh like it was made of kindling, and the creature's shriek became something beyond hearing. A sound felt in the bones rather than heard with the ears. It turned and fled, crashing through the doorway and into the night. I followed, my own clothes smoldering, and watched as it rolled in the dirt trying to extinguish the flames. But the fire had already taken hold, spreading across its body with unnatural speed and intensity. The Wendigo burned like a torch, its screams echoing through the forest and sending birds exploding from the trees in terrified clouds. As the flames consumed it, I could see other shapes in the fire, the faces of everyone it had consumed over the years, finally free to find their rest. When it was over, nothing remained but ash and the lingering smell of charred meat. I stood there for a long time, watching the gray remains scatter on the wind and feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. The emptiness was still there. The divorce, the job, the long list of failures that had driven me to this place, but it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like space for something new to grow. The cabin burned to its foundation that night, taking with it the last of my supplies and any hope of staying longer. But by dawn, I could hear the distant sound of engines. Search and rescue teams, probably dispatched when I failed to check in with Jake. They found me sitting by the creek, washing soot from my hands and watching the sun rise through the trees. The story I told them was simple. Electrical fire, probably caused by faulty wiring in the old cabin. They believed it because it was easier than the truth, and because the truth was something that belonged to these woods, not to the world of forms and reports and rational explanations. I never told anyone about the Wendigo, just like I never told anyone about finding its collection in the trees. The dozens of missing persons who had vanished in these woods over the years, all carefully preserved and arranged for the creature's viewing pleasure. By the time the authorities could have investigated, the fire had spread to the surrounding forest, reducing everything to ash and memory. But sometimes, late at night when the loneliness becomes too heavy to bear, I remember the sound of the Wendigo burning and the feel of flames against my back. I remember choosing fire over emptiness, pain over numbness, the risk of destruction over the certainty of being consumed from within. The hunger is still there. It always will be. But now I know the difference between being empty and being hollowed out. Being empty means there's room for something to grow. Being hollowed out means you've already been eaten, even if you don't know it yet. I never went back to those woods, and I never will. But sometimes I wonder if there are others like me out there, people who carry their own emptiness like a wound, people who might mistake the Wendigo's false promises for salvation. I hope they choose the fire. I hope they understand that burning is better than being consumed, that some hungers can only be fed by refusing to feed them at all. The divorce papers are still on my kitchen table, but now they're signed. Emma asks about me when Sarah brings her for visits, and I try to be the father she deserves instead of the hollow man I used to be. It's harder than I expected, but harder in a way that feels real, substantial, like building something instead of watching it slowly decay. The emptiness remains, but I've learned to live with it. Some spaces are meant to stay empty, waiting for the right thing to fill them. And some hungers are meant to be ignored, no matter how loudly they howl in the darkness beyond the fire's reach. I keep a lighter in my pocket now, always, just in case. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin, near the abandoned logging town of Clam Lake 3 months ago. I should have listened to the old man at Hayward's only remaining gas station. His weathered hands had trembled as he counted our change. His rheumy eyes fixed on our hiking gear with something that looked like pity. "You boys heading up to the Namecagon headwaters?" he'd asked, his voice barely above a whisper. When we confirmed our destination, he'd shaken his head slowly. "Bad hunting season this year. Real bad. Things been coming down from the deep woods. Hungry things." We'd laughed it off then, chalking it up to small-town superstition. 3 college friends on our annual reunion trip, eager to escape the suffocating grip of our corporate jobs in Milwaukee. There was Danny Martinez, my roommate from freshman year, built like a linebacker but gentle as a lamb, always the mediator when tempers flared. Kevin King came from money but never flaunted it, the kind of guy who'd give you his last dollar without thinking twice. And then there was me, the planner, the one who'd mapped out our route through some of the most pristine wilderness Wisconsin had to offer. The October air bit at our faces as we shouldered our packs and headed north from the Clam Lake access point. Our destination was a secluded campsite near Spider Lake, a good 8 miles through dense forest that hadn't seen a logging operation in over 50 years. The canopy above us filtered the afternoon sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and shadow, and our boots crunched through a carpet of maple and oak leaves painted in brilliant reds and oranges. For the first few hours, everything felt perfect. We fell into the familiar rhythm of hiking together, trading jokes and catching up on the mundane details of our lives since last year's trip. Danny regaled us with stories from his job at the insurance company, complete with spot-on impressions of his boss that had Kevin and me doubled over with laughter. The weight of civilization seemed to lift from our shoulders with each step deeper into the wilderness. But as the sun began its descent toward the western tree line, something subtle shifted in the atmosphere around us. The forest sounds that had accompanied our march, the chittering of squirrels, the distant hammering of woodpeckers, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, gradually faded into an oppressive silence. At first, none of us mentioned it. Perhaps we were all hoping someone else would break the spell of unease that had settled over our group like a heavy blanket. It was Kevin who finally voiced what we were all thinking. "Anyone else notice how quiet it's gotten?" His voice seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness, causing all three of us to instinctively lower our voices. Danny adjusted his pack straps and scanned the forest around us. "Maybe we spooked something big. Bear, maybe?" I checked my GPS unit, a high-end model I'd splurged on specifically for trips like this. The screen flickered, showing our position as a blinking dot surrounded by nothing. No topographical lines, no trail markers, just blank green space. I tapped the screen, thinking perhaps moisture had gotten into the casing, but the display remained stubbornly empty. "GPS is acting up," I announced, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. "No big deal, I've got paper maps." But when I pulled out the topographical map I'd marked so carefully at home, the lines seemed to swim before my eyes. The trail we'd been following wasn't marked on the map at all. According to the paper in my hands, we should have been standing in the middle of an impassable swamp. "That's weird," I muttered, rotating the map to try different orientations. Nothing made sense. The compass needle spun lazily before settling on what should have been north, but even that felt wrong somehow. "We've been walking pretty much straight north," Kevin said, reading my confusion. "How far off course could we be?" Before I could answer, a sound drifted through the trees that made my blood run cold. It started low, almost below the threshold of hearing, like the distant rumble of an approaching storm, but gradually it rose in pitch, becoming a keening wail that seemed to come from every direction at once. The sound was primal, hungry, and utterly inhuman. We froze, our breathing the only sound in the suddenly claustrophobic forest. The wail faded, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like a physical presence pressing against our eardrums. "What the hell was that?" Danny whispered, his face pale beneath his olive complexion. "Coyotes," I said quickly, though I knew it wasn't true. I'd heard coyotes plenty of times before. This was something else entirely, something that made every primitive instinct in my body scream warnings about predators and darkness and the hunger that lurked just beyond the firelight. We pressed on, none of us willing to admit how rattled we'd become. The trail, if it could even be called that anymore, seemed to twist and branch in ways that defied logic. Every time I thought I'd gotten our bearings, we'd emerge from a grove of pines to find ourselves facing a landscape that looked nothing like what should have been there according to my maps. As dusk approached, we came upon a small clearing beside a stream that didn't appear on any of my charts. The water ran dark and silent, reflecting the purpling sky like black glass. Despite my growing unease about our location, the site was perfect for camping. Level ground, access to water, and a nice windbreak of mature hemlocks. "This'll do," I announced, dropping my pack with relief. My shoulders ached from the uneven weight distribution, and I was eager to get our camp established before full darkness fell. We went through the familiar motions of setting up camp, each of us falling into roles we'd perfected over years of wilderness trips together. Danny gathered firewood, while Kevin and I erected our tents. Within an hour, we had a cozy campsite with a crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. But even as we settled in for the evening, sharing a bottle of whiskey Kevin had smuggled in his pack, the oppressive atmosphere of the forest seemed to press closer. The darkness beyond our small circle of firelight felt thick and hungry, as if it were actively working to swallow what little light we'd managed to create. "You know what's really bugging me?" Kevin said, taking a swig from the bottle before passing it to Danny. "We haven't seen a single animal since this afternoon. No deer, no rabbits, nothing. It's like everything just left." Danny nodded grimly. "And no birds either. When's the last time you were in the woods and didn't hear at least one bird?" I'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing it voiced aloud made the reality more unsettling. Animals had an instinct for danger that humans had largely lost. If they'd all fled this area, what did they know that we didn't? As if summoned by our conversation, that terrible wailing sound rose from the darkness again, closer this time, much closer. It seemed to circle our campsite, moving through the trees with impossible stealth. The sound was layered now, as if multiple voices had joined in a chorus of hunger and madness. We huddled closer to the fire, instinctively seeking the protection of light against whatever lurked in the darkness. The flames, which had been burning steadily yellow and orange, suddenly flickered and changed color, taking on an eerie blue-green hue that cast sickly shadows on our faces. "What's wrong with the fire?" Danny asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Before any of us could answer, the flames died completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. The silence that followed was deafening. No cricket songs, no rustle of wind through leaves, no bubble of the nearby stream. It was as if the entire forest had been wrapped in cotton, muffling every sound except the thundering of our own heartbeats. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking as I clicked the switch. Nothing. I clicked it again, then checked the batteries, fresh ones I'd installed that morning, but the light remained dead. "Mine's not working either," Kevin whispered, his voice barely audible in the oppressive darkness. Danny's lighter flicked once, twice, producing only sparks, but no flame. Even the emergency flares in my pack refused to ignite, as if the very concept of light had been banished from this place. We sat in the terrible darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to our own ragged breathing and the subtle sounds of movement in the forest around us. Branches cracked under weight that shouldn't have been there. Leaves rustled despite the complete absence of wind. And underneath it all, barely perceptible, was the sound of something large breathing. Slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Then, as suddenly as it had died, our fire roared back to life, the flames leaping higher than they had any right to given the amount of fuel we'd provided. The sudden return of light should have been comforting, but instead it revealed something that made my stomach clench with terror. Our campsite had been rearranged. Our tents, which we'd positioned in a neat triangle around the fire pit, now formed a perfect circle with the fire at the center. Our packs, which had been sitting beside each tent, were now arranged in a smaller circle inside the tent ring. Most unsettling of all, the stream that had been running north to south along the eastern edge of our clearing was now flowing in the opposite direction, its dark water moving uphill in defiance of gravity and physics. "This isn't possible," Kevin breathed, his face white in the firelight. But even as we tried to process what we were seeing, I noticed something else that made my blood run cold. There, pressed into the soft earth around our fire pit, were footprints. But they weren't human prints, despite their bipedal nature. They were elongated, with claw marks extending far beyond where toes should have been. And they were fresh. So fresh that water was still seeping into the impressions from the disturbed soil. "We need to leave," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Right now. Pack everything and get out of here." "It's full dark," Danny protested, though his tone suggested he was already convinced. "We'll never find our way back to the trail." "We'll follow the stream," I said, gesturing toward the impossibly backwards flowing water. Water always leads somewhere. As we hurriedly stuffed our gear into our packs, that terrible wailing sound rose from the darkness again, but this time it was different. There was an intelligence to it now, a deliberate pattern that almost sounded like words. Or what words might sound like if they were spoken by something that had never been human but had learned to mimic human speech by listening to the dying screams of lost hikers. We shouldered our packs and followed the stream into the forest, our combined flashlights somehow working again now that we'd decided to leave. The narrow beam of light carved a small tunnel through the absolute darkness, revealing gnarled tree roots and hanging branches that seemed to reach toward us like grasping fingers. For about a mile, we made good progress, following the eerily backward stream through increasingly dense undergrowth. But gradually, I became aware that something was wrong with our group dynamic. Danny, who usually kept up a steady stream of nervous chatter in stressful situations, had fallen completely silent. When I glanced back to check on him, he was there, bringing up the rear, as always, but something about his posture struck me as odd. "Danny?" I called softly. "You okay back there?" He didn't respond, just kept walking with that strange, too stiff gait. In the dancing beam of my flashlight, his face looked pale and slack, his eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. "Danny," Kevin called, turning around to walk backwards for a few steps. "Talk to us, man." This time, Danny looked up, and when he smiled, ice water flooded my veins. It was Danny's face, Danny's features, but the expression was all wrong. The smile was too wide, stretching his mouth into an unnatural rictus that revealed too many teeth. His eyes, usually warm brown, now reflected our flashlight beams with an oily, predatory gleam. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was off too, slightly deeper than normal, with an odd resonance that seemed to echo inside my skull. "Just tired. Long day." Kevin and I exchanged a glance, both of us recognizing that something fundamental had changed about our friend. But what could we do? He looked like Danny, walked like Danny, even wore Danny's clothes. If I tried to voice my suspicions, Kevin would think I'd lost my mind. We continued following the stream, but I found myself constantly looking back at Danny, trying to catch him in some definitive proof that he wasn't himself. The wrongness was subtle but persistent. The way he held his shoulders too rigidly, the fact that he never blinked, the slight delay in his responses as if he had to think about how a human should react to each situation. After another mile, we came to a place where the stream forked, one branch continuing straight while the other curved away into a dense grove of birch trees. According to my map, which was somehow readable again, both branches would eventually lead back toward populated areas, though by very different routes. "Which way?" Kevin asked, playing his flashlight beam across both options. I was about to suggest we take the straight path when Danny spoke up from behind us. "The birch grove," he said with certainty. "That's the faster route." I frowned, studying my map again. The grove route was actually longer and would take us through much rougher terrain. "I don't think so," I said slowly. "The main branch looks more direct." "Trust me," Danny said, and this time his voice carried an undertone of command that was completely unlike his normal accommodating nature. "I know these woods." That was when I realized the truth that had been nagging at me for the past hour. Danny had never been to this part of Wisconsin before. None of us had. Yet he was speaking with the confidence of someone who'd walked these trails 100 times. Kevin was already heading toward the birch grove, apparently convinced by Danny's certainty. But every instinct I possessed was screaming warnings. The grove looked wrong somehow. Too symmetrical, too perfect, like a movie set designed to lure victims into a trap. "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "let's take the main branch. I want to stick close to the water." Danny's head turned toward me with a mechanical precision that no human neck should have been capable of, rotating nearly 180 degrees while his body remained facing forward. In the beam of my flashlight, his face was a mask of barely contained fury, his too wide smile stretching into something that belonged on a skull rather than a living person. "The grove," he repeated, and now his voice carried no pretense of humanity. It was the sound of wind through dead leaves, of ice cracking under pressure, of things hungry and ancient stirring in deep caves. Kevin had stopped walking and was staring at Danny with growing horror. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "What happened to you?" The thing wearing Danny's face laughed, a sound like breaking glass and grinding bones. "Danny's gone," it said, its voice now a hollow mockery of our friend's warm baritone. "He went to gather firewood and found something much more interesting than sticks and kindling. Found me." The memories came flooding back then. Danny offering to collect wood for our fire, wandering off into the forest alone just as dusk was falling. He'd been gone for almost an hour, long enough for us to start joking about him getting lost 20 yards from camp. When he'd returned, arms full of perfectly dry wood despite the damp conditions, we'd been so relieved that we hadn't questioned the subtle changes in his behavior. "Where is he?" I demanded, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. The Danny thing tilted its head at an impossible angle, like a bird studying an interesting insect. "He's right here," it said, patting its chest with Danny's hands. Every memory, every fear, every scream as I hollowed him out and crawled inside. He's watching from in here, seeing everything I do with his body, feeling everything I make him feel. Kevin made a sound that was half sob, half retch. "You're lying." "Am I?" The creature leaned forward, its movements becoming more fluid and predatory. "Ask me something only Danny would know. Go ahead, I have access to everything he was." But I was already backing away, grabbing Kevin's arm and pulling him with me toward the mainstream branch. The thing had made a mistake in revealing itself so completely. Whatever it was, however it had taken Danny, it wanted us to follow it into that birch grove. And if it wanted that, it was the last thing we should do. "Run," I whispered to Kevin, and then we were crashing through the underbrush, our flashlights swinging wildly as we followed the dark stream deeper into the forest. Behind us, the Danny thing let out that terrible wailing cry again, but this time it was joined by other voices, a whole chorus of hungry, inhuman sounds that seemed to come from every direction at once. And underneath it all, barely audible but unmistakably real, I could hear Danny's actual voice screaming in agony and terror from somewhere inside his own stolen body. We ran blindly through the darkness, branches whipping at our faces and roots trying to trip us with every step. The stream beside us gurgled and chuckled like it was enjoying our panic, its backwards flow seeming to accelerate as if eager to carry us toward whatever nightmare awaited downstream. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. But it wasn't just the Danny thing following us now. I could hear multiple sets of footsteps crashing through the underbrush, could see additional flashlight beams sweeping through the trees. Except our group had only brought 3 lights, and Kevin and I were carrying 2 of them. "How many of them are there?" Kevin gasped as we paused to catch our breath behind a massive fallen oak. I peered back the way we'd come and felt my heart stop. There were at least 6 flashlight beams visible through the trees, all moving toward us with coordinated precision. And as I watched, I began to recognize the silhouettes carrying them. There was Danny, of course, but also Kevin. Another Kevin, identical to the one crouching beside me, same build, same clothes, same concerned expression. And behind him, impossibly, another version of myself, perfect in every detail except for the predatory way it moved through the forest. "They're copying us," I whispered in horror. "Making duplicates." Kevin followed my gaze and saw his own doppelganger hunting him through the darkness. His face went white with shock and terror. "That's not possible. How can they—" His question was cut off by a new sound from the forest behind us, Danny's voice, but changed, corrupted. "Mike, Kevin, where are you guys? Something's wrong with me. I need help." The voice was perfect, capturing every nuance of Danny's speech patterns, even managing to convey the exact type of confusion and fear that Danny would feel in this situation. If I hadn't seen the thing wearing his face just minutes before, I might have believed it myself. "Please," the fake Danny called out, its voice growing closer. "I can't remember how I got here. Everything's fuzzy. I think something bit me. I'm bleeding." Kevin started to rise, his natural instinct to help a friend overriding his rational fear. I grabbed his arm and pulled him back down behind the log. "It's not him," I hissed. "It's trying to trick us." But even as I said it, doubt began to gnaw at me. What if the thing I'd seen earlier had been some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? What if Danny really was hurt and needed our help? The uncertainty was almost worse than the fear. At least with clear danger, you knew what to do. The voices of our duplicates continued to call out from different directions, sometimes pleading for help, sometimes angry and demanding that we stop running. They knew exactly what to say to play on our emotions, leveraging years of friendship and shared experiences against us. "Remember freshman year?" the fake Kevin called out. "When you had food poisoning and I stayed up all night making sure you didn't choke on your own vomit? This is how you repay me? By running away when I need you?" The words hit like physical blows, dredging up memories and guilt that made it even harder to think clearly. These things didn't just look like our friends. They had access to our friends' memories, their personalities, their knowledge of exactly which emotional buttons to push. We continued following the stream, but our pursuers were gaining ground. The terrain was working against us, forcing us to move slowly through dense undergrowth while our duplicates seemed to glide through the forest with supernatural ease. Several times, I caught glimpses of them between the trees, their movements too fluid and coordinated to be entirely human. That was when I noticed something that chilled me even more than the pursuit itself. The stream we'd been following was no longer flowing backwards. Sometime during our flight, it had resumed its natural course, rushing downhill toward what I hoped was civilization. But if the water was flowing normally again, did that mean we'd escaped whatever supernatural influence had taken hold of our campsite? Or had we simply moved deeper into its territory? My question was answered when we emerged from a grove of pines to find ourselves standing at the edge of a familiar clearing. Our campsite lay before us, the fire still burning merrily, our tents arranged in that impossible perfect circle. Somehow, despite following the stream for what felt like miles, we'd come full circle. "This isn't possible," Kevin whispered, echoing his words from earlier in the evening. But the evidence was right in front of us. We were trapped in some kind of spatial loop, always ending up back where we started no matter which direction we traveled. As we stood there in stunned disbelief, our duplicates emerged from the forest around us, forming a perfect circle with us at the center. 6 figures total, 2 copies each of Danny, Kevin, and myself. In the flickering firelight, the resemblance was perfect, down to the smallest details of clothing and expression. "You can't run from yourselves," the first Danny thing said, its voice now openly mocking. "We are you. We know every thought, every fear, every weakness. We know exactly how to hurt you because we know exactly how you hurt." "What do you want?" I demanded, though my voice came out as barely more than a croak. "To feed," said one of my duplicates, stepping forward with movements that were almost but not quite right. "To experience what it's like to be warm, to have a heartbeat, to know what it means to be human. You understand, we've been so cold for so long?" The real Kevin grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in so hard I was sure they'd leave bruises. "The stories," he whispered urgently. "The old man at the gas station. He was trying to warn us about Wendigos." Wendigos. The name hit me like a physical blow as half-remembered legends from my childhood came flooding back. Cannibalistic spirits from Native American folklore, creatures of perpetual hunger that could never be satisfied no matter how much they consumed. They were said to inhabit the deepest parts of the northern forests, preying on lost travelers and driving them to madness and cannibalism. But these weren't the Wendigos from the old stories. They were something worse. Predators that could wear the faces of their victims, that could access their memories and personalities to create perfect psychological warfare. They didn't just want to eat our bodies, they wanted to consume our identities, to steal everything that made us human. "The thing is," said the Kevin duplicate, its head tilted at that same unnatural angle I'd seen from the Danny thing, We don't just take your bodies. We take your places in the world. Your jobs, your families, your friends. No one will ever know you're gone because we'll be you, living your lives, sleeping in your beds. What happened to the real you? I asked the Danny thing, though I was afraid I already knew. Its smile stretched impossibly wide, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous for any human mouth. I told you, he's right here, watching, feeling, screaming. He'll be conscious for everything I do with his body, every person I hurt using his face, every life I destroy while wearing his smile. He'll experience it all, but he'll never be able to stop it or warn anyone or even let them know he's trapped inside his own flesh. The thought of spending eternity as a prisoner in my own body, forced to watch as some monster used my face to hurt the people I loved, was more terrifying than any physical death. I'd rather die fighting than live as a spectator to my own existence. That was when I noticed something the Wendigos had missed in their perfect mimicry. The real Kevin standing beside me was missing something that all of his duplicates possessed. A small scar on his left hand from a fishing accident we'd had 5 years ago. It was barely visible unless you knew to look for it, but once I spotted the discrepancy, other small differences became apparent. The duplicates were too perfect, like high-resolution photographs that captured every surface detail but missed the subtle imperfections that made a person real. "Kevin," I whispered, not daring to look at him directly. "Your scar." He glanced down at his hand and immediately understood. The Wendigos might have access to our memories, but they couldn't replicate physical damage that had occurred before they encountered us. They were working from some kind of idealized template rather than the reality of our actual bodies. Moving as casually as possible, I reached into my pack and felt around for the emergency flare I'd tried to light earlier. My fingers closed around the familiar cylinder, and I sent up a silent prayer that whatever supernatural interference had prevented it from working before had lifted. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said aloud, trying to keep the Wendigos focused on my words rather than my actions. "Danny always said he wanted to live forever. Looks like he's getting his wish." The Danny thing's expression shifted, become more cruel and pleased. "Oh, he's not enjoying it as much as he thought he would. The hunger never stops. You see, it's like being starved for eternity, but worse, because you remember what it felt like to be satisfied, and you know you'll never feel that way again." I pulled the pin on the flare and held it behind my back, ready to strike the igniter. "What about you?" I asked the creature wearing my face. "Do you remember what you were before?" My duplicate tilted its head thoughtfully. "Hunger," it said simply. "Cold, the long wait in the darkness between meals, but soon we'll remember warmth and satisfaction and the taste of properly seasoned food instead of raw meat torn from screaming prey." "I've got a better idea," I said, and struck the flare. The magnesium igniter blazed to life with a brilliant white light that turned the forest clearing into a snapshot of hell. All 6 Wendigos shrieked in unison, their careful human facades dropping as the intense illumination revealed their true forms. They were tall and gaunt, with skin like pale leather stretched over impossible angles of bone. Their faces were still recognizably human in structure, but elongated and distorted, with jaws that unhinged like snakes and eyes that reflected the flare light like mirrors. Kevin didn't need any encouragement. He grabbed a burning branch from our fire and swung it at the nearest duplicate, his Kevin copy which dissolved into shadows and smoke rather than taking the impact. But the other Wendigos didn't disappear. They just became more obviously monstrous, their human disguises falling away to reveal the hungry predators underneath. The flare wouldn't last long, maybe 3 minutes at most. But in that time, I could see the forest around us clearly for the first time since we'd made camp. And what I saw gave me hope. We weren't actually in the middle of an endless wilderness. Through the trees, maybe half a mile to the east, I could see electric lights, the glow of a town or at least a major road. The Wendigos had been using some kind of spatial distortion to keep us running in circles, but the intense light from the flare seemed to be disrupting their ability to manipulate our perceptions. "That way," I shouted to Kevin, pointing toward the distant lights. "Run and don't look back." We crashed through the circle of Wendigos, Kevin swinging his burning branch while I held the flare high above my head. The creatures shrieked and clawed at us, but they seemed unable to maintain their physical forms in the presence of so much light. Their talons passed through us like smoke, solid enough to feel the cold touch but not to actually wound. Behind us, the Danny thing let out a wail of rage and loss that seemed to shake the very trees. "You can't escape us," it howled, its voice now completely inhuman. "We know you're sent now. We'll follow you home. We'll take everyone you love." But we were already running, crashing through underbrush that suddenly seemed much less dense than it had before. The flare flickered and sparked in my hand, sending dancing shadows across the forest floor as we stumbled toward those distant lights. The Wendigos pursued us, but they seemed to be losing cohesion as we moved away from their territory. Their cries grew fainter and more distorted, until they sounded more like wind through dead branches than the voices of creatures that had once been human. We burst out of the forest onto a 2-lane highway just as my flare finally died, plunging us back into darkness. But it was normal darkness now, the kind that was broken by the reassuring glow of streetlights and the distant hum of traffic. A few hundred yards down the road, I could see the neon sign of a truck stop, its parking lot full of semis and pickup trucks. Kevin and I stumbled toward that beacon of civilization, our legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. We didn't speak for the first few minutes, too overwhelmed by relief and horror to process what we'd just experienced. It wasn't until we reached the truck stop that Kevin finally broke the silence. "What do we tell people about Danny?" I stopped walking, the full weight of our situation finally hitting me. Danny Martinez, our friend since freshman year, was gone. Not dead, that would have been bad enough, but something infinitely worse. His body was still walking around out there in the forest, but the mind inside it belonged to something hungry and ancient and utterly inhuman. "We tell them he fell," I said finally, "got separated from the group in the dark and went over a cliff or into the river. We searched but couldn't find him. They'll want to see a body. Then they won't find one. It happens in the wilderness. People disappear." Kevin nodded slowly, understanding the necessity of the lie even as it tore at both of us. We couldn't tell the truth. Who would believe us? And even if someone did believe, what could they do? Send search and rescue teams into those woods to face the same fate Danny had suffered? We called the authorities from the truck stop, reported our friend missing, and played our roles as devastated survivors. The search teams found our abandoned campsite, but no trace of Danny beyond some footprints that the experts said didn't look quite right, but couldn't explain further. The official cause of disappearance was listed as a probable drowning. The backwards flowing stream had returned to normal by the time the searchers arrived, and the theory was that Danny had fallen in and been swept away. His body was never recovered. But I know the truth. Danny isn't dead. He's still out there in those woods, trapped inside his own flesh while something wearing his face waits for the next group of hikers to venture too far from the marked trails. And sometimes, in the early hours of the morning when sleep won't come, I can swear I hear his voice calling out to me across the distance, begging for help that I'll never be able to provide. The Wendigos were right about one thing. They do know our scent now. Kevin and I have both reported incidents over the past 3 months. Glimpses of familiar faces in crowds that vanish when we look directly at them. Phone calls where no one speaks but we can hear something breathing on the other end. The feeling of being watched when we're alone in our apartments. They haven't made their move yet, but I know they will. They're patient, these hungry things from the deep woods. They can wait years if necessary, following us back to our lives and learning everything about the people we love. And when they finally decide to feed again, they'll have the perfect disguises to get close to their prey. I've started carrying a magnesium flare everywhere I go. It's a small protection, but it's something. The light disrupts their illusions, forces them to show their true forms. If they come for me, when they come for me, I'll be ready. But I know I can't run forever. And I know that somewhere in the Chequamegon National Forest, in a clearing that maps say doesn't exist, Danny Martinez is still screaming inside his own stolen body, watching helplessly as a monster uses his face to lure new victims into the hungry dark. The old man at the gas station was right. It had been a bad hunting season. Bad for the prey, at least. For the hunters, it had been very good indeed. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin, about 40 miles southeast of Ashland, near the Penaky Hills. I worked at Hartwell & Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm in Milwaukee. Every October, our department would take a long weekend camping trip to build team morale, as our manager put it. I'd been on 3 of these trips before, and they were always the same: s'mores, terrible ghost stories around the campfire, and Dave from payroll getting drunk and trying to sing karaoke without a karaoke machine. This time was different. The team was smaller than usual, just 4 of us. Michael Williams, no relation, despite the shared surname. Brian Wright, Sarah Rodriguez, and myself. Michael was our unofficial leader, a outdoorsy type who actually knew how to set up a tent without swearing. Sarah was the office comedian, always ready with a joke to cut tension. Brian was quiet. He'd only been with the company 6 months, and none of us really knew him well. He volunteered for everything but rarely spoke unless directly addressed. We'd reserved a backcountry campsite accessible only by hiking trail, about 8 miles from the nearest road. Michael insisted it would be authentic and character building. Sarah joked that if she wanted character building, she'd date her ex again. The drive up Highway 13 took forever, winding through dense forests of maple, birch, and pine. The leaves were at peak color, brilliant reds and golds that should have been beautiful. Instead, they reminded me of fire, of dried blood. I blamed it on my mood. I'd been dreading this trip for weeks, though I couldn't pinpoint why. We parked at the Iron Bridge trailhead around 2 p.m. on Friday. The temperature was dropping faster than the weather app had predicted, already down to 45 degrees with thick gray clouds building overhead. Michael consulted his GPS device and frowned. "That's weird," he muttered, tapping the screen. "It's showing we're about 5 miles south of where we should be." "Maybe the satellites are having a bad day," Sarah suggested, shouldering her pack. "You know how it is up here in the boonies." Michael shrugged and pulled out a paper map, spreading it across the hood of his Jeep. The wind immediately tried to tear it from his hands. "Okay, according to this, we follow the Iron Bridge Trail northeast for about 6 miles, then take the spur trail west to the campsite." The hike started easily enough. The trail was well marked, winding through stands of towering white pines that blocked most of the sky. Our boots crunched on fallen leaves, and somewhere in the distance a loon called across one of the many small lakes that dotted the region. Normal forest sounds, peaceful even, but after about 2 miles, things started feeling off. First, it was the silence. One moment we were surrounded by the rustle of small animals, the chatter of squirrels, the distant drumming of woodpeckers. The next, nothing. Even our own voices seemed muffled, swallowed by the trees. "Is it just me, or did it get really quiet?" Sarah asked, voicing what we were all thinking. "Animals probably smell a storm coming," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. He kept checking his GPS, shaking it like that would help. We pressed on. The trail seemed to fork more often than the map indicated, and twice Michael had to backtrack when the path simply ended. Not grown over or washed out, just ended, as if whoever had been maintaining it had simply stopped mid-thought. By the time we reached what should have been the spur trail to our campsite, the light was fading. The gray clouds had thickened into a solid ceiling, and the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Our breath came out in small puffs. "I don't understand this," Michael said, staring at his GPS. The device was cycling through a series of error messages. It keeps showing different coordinates. And look at this. He turned the screen toward us. The map display was fragmenting, showing impossible terrain features. A lake where the trail should be, mountains where the topography was supposed to be flat. Brian spoke for the first time in an hour. Maybe we should just pick a spot and make camp. It's getting dark. There was something in his voice, an odd flatness that made me look at him more carefully. He was staring into the trees, but not at anything specific, just staring with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Brian's right," I said, though something about agreeing with him made my skin crawl. "We can sort out the navigation tomorrow." We found a small clearing about 50 yards off what we hoped was still the main trail. Michael and Sarah worked on setting up the tents while Brian gathered firewood. I tried to help, but kept getting distracted by sounds that seemed to come from just outside my hearing range. Whispers, maybe, or the rustle of something large moving through the underbrush. "Jennifer, you okay?" Sarah asked. She was wrestling with tent stakes, cursing creatively as they bent against the rocky soil. "Yeah, just... Do you hear that?" She paused, listening. "Hear what?" "Nothing, never mind." But I did hear it. A low, rhythmic sound, almost like chanting. It seemed to come from every direction at once, then fade away entirely when I tried to focus on it. Brian returned with an armload of dead branches just as full darkness fell. The temperature had plummeted. I could see ice crystals forming on the water bottles. Michael got a fire started, and we huddled around it, sharing lukewarm soup from thermoses and trying to pretend everything was normal. "So," Sarah said with forced cheer, "anyone got any good ghost stories?" "Actually," Brian said, and again that strange flatness in his voice made me look up. "I know one about this forest." Michael was checking his phone for the third time in 10 minutes. No signal, not even emergency services. "The story," Brian continued as if Michael hadn't spoken, "is about a group of loggers who got lost up here in 1847. They were cutting timber for the railroad, but there was an early blizzard. They ran out of food after 2 weeks. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling up into the black sky. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around my shoulders. They drew lots to see who would provide sustenance for the others." Brian's smile was wider now, showing too much teeth. "But the man they chose, Samuel Kowalski, he didn't go quietly. He cursed them as they held him down, said he'd make sure they never left these woods." "Cheerful," Sarah muttered, but her usual humor sounded strained. "They found the camp 6 months later when the snow melted. All the men were dead, but not from starvation. They'd been opened up, hollowed out, and Samuel Kowalski was missing entirely, not even bones." "Brian," I said, "where did you hear this story?" He turned to look at me, and in the firelight his eyes seemed too reflective like an animal's. "I've always known it." That night, I couldn't sleep, not just because of Brian's story, though that certainly didn't help. It was the sounds outside our tent. Footsteps circling the camp, too heavy to be a raccoon or even a deer. Branches breaking, but not randomly, with purpose, as if something large was moving in a deliberate pattern around us. Around 3 a.m., I heard Sarah's voice outside. "Hello? Is someone there?" I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as possible and crawled to the tent flap. Through the mesh, I could see Sarah standing at the edge of the firelight, still in her pajamas. She was looking into the trees, her head tilted as if listening to something. "Sarah?" I whispered. She didn't respond. She took a step forward, then another, moving toward the tree line with the jerky, unnatural gait of a sleepwalker. I scrambled out of my tent, bare feet hitting the freezing ground. "Sarah?" She stopped, turned. For a moment in the dying firelight her face looked wrong, features too sharp, eyes too deep. Then she blinked, and she was Sarah again, confused and shivering. "What? Why am I outside?" "You were sleepwalking," I said, though I wasn't sure that's what it had been. "Come on, let's get you back to your tent." The next morning brought worse problems. Michael's pack was missing, not just misplaced. but gone, along with most of our food and his backup navigation equipment. Sarah's water bottles had frozen solid despite being inside her tent. And Brian was different. He'd always been quiet, but now he seemed almost catatonic, responding to questions with single words or just nodding. When he did speak, it was in that same flat tone from the night before, and he kept staring at things that weren't there, his head tracking movement that only he could see. "Maybe he's hypothermic," Sarah suggested as we packed up camp. "Should we head back?" "With what map?" Michael asked, frustration bleeding into his voice. "My GPS is completely dead, and I can't figure out which trail we came in on. They all look the same." It was true. In daylight, our surroundings looked completely different. The trail we'd followed yesterday was nowhere to be found, and the trees seemed to have rearranged themselves overnight. Every direction looked identical. Dense forest stretching away into gray mist. "We pick a direction and stick with it," Michael decided. "Southwest should take us back toward the highway eventually." We hiked for hours, but nothing looked familiar. The forest seemed to swallow sound, muffling even our own footsteps. Several times, I would have sworn we'd passed the same deadfall or distinctive boulder, but Michael insisted we were making progress. Brian walked at the rear of our group, and I found myself constantly glancing back at him. He moved differently now, a predatory smoothness that hadn't been there before. And his smile. He smiled constantly now, that same too-wide expression that never touched his eyes. "Brian," I said during a rest break, "are you feeling okay?" "Never better," he replied, and his voice was like broken glass wrapped in velvet. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Sarah was checking her phone for the 100th time when she froze. "Guys, look at this." The screen showed a single text message sent just minutes ago. But that was impossible. None of us had signal. The message read, "One of you is not who they seem. Trust no one. Get out now." The sender was listed as unknown. That's not possible," Michael said, leaning over her shoulder. "There's no cell tower for 50 miles. Maybe it's some kind of emergency broadcast," Sarah suggested, but her voice was small and scared. I looked at Brian. He was still smiling, watching us with the patient interest of a cat watching mice. "We need to move," I said. "Now!" We pushed harder through the afternoon, but the forest seemed to actively resist our progress. Trails would fork unexpectedly or simply vanish into impenetrable undergrowth. The temperature continued to drop, and by late afternoon, snow began to fall. Fat, heavy flakes that shouldn't have been possible in October. That's when we heard the howling. It started low and distant, like wind through rocks, but it grew closer, louder, and more distinctly. Wrong. Not quite wolf, not quite human. Something in between that made every primitive instinct I had scream in terror. "What the hell was that?" Sarah whispered. Brian's smile widened. "Dinner time." Before any of us could react, he moved. Not like a person, like something wearing a person's skin. He lunged at Sarah with inhuman speed, hands extended into claws that definitely hadn't been there moments before. I screamed and threw myself backward, crashing into Michael. Sarah had faster reflexes than either of us. She spun away from Brian's attack and brought her hiking pole up like a spear. The metal tip caught him in the shoulder, and he shrieked. The sound was like nothing human, a mixture of rage and hunger that echoed through the trees. "Run!" Michael shouted. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our faces and clothes. Behind us, that inhuman shrieking continued, joined by others, a chorus of voices that might once have been human, but were something else entirely now. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing that had been Brian was following us, but it was changing as it moved. Its limbs were elongating, joints bending in directions that should have been impossible. Its face was stretching, jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. And its eyes were full of hungry intelligence. We ran blindly through the darkening forest. crashing through deadfall and scrambling over moss-covered rocks. The howling followed us, sometimes seeming to come from directly behind, sometimes from all around us. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like rubber, but the terror kept me moving. "There," Michael gasped, pointing ahead. A cabin materialized out of the gloom. Old logs chinked with moss, a stone chimney, windows dark as empty eye sockets. It looked abandoned, but it was shelter. We stumbled up the sagging porch steps, and Michael threw his shoulder against the door. It opened with a groan of rusted hinges, and we tumbled inside. The cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace and rough wooden furniture. Everything was covered in dust and mouse droppings, but there were no signs of recent habitation. Michael slammed the door behind us and looked around frantically for something to barricade it with. "The table," Sarah gasped. "Help me move the table." We wrestled the heavy wooden table against the door just as something large struck it from outside. The entire cabin shook, and dust rained down from the rafters. Another impact. Wood splintered. "The windows," I said. "We need to block the windows." We tipped over chairs, stacked them against the small windows as best we could. It wouldn't stop something that was determined to get in, but it might slow it down. The attacks on the door stopped suddenly, leaving us in silence broken only by our ragged breathing. I could smell our fear, sharp and acrid in the stale air. "What was that thing?" Sarah whispered. "Brian," Michael said, though he sounded like he didn't believe it himself. "That wasn't Brian," I said. "That was something else. Something wearing Brian's face." A new sound made us all freeze, scratching like claws on wood. It was coming from above us, from the roof. "Oh, God," Sarah breathed. "It's on the roof." The scratching moved across the ceiling, slow and deliberate. Whatever was up there was taking its time, maybe looking for a way in. The chimney, I realized, if it could fit. A shower of soot and debris fell from the fireplace, followed by a sound like laughter, high and thin and definitely not human. "The fireplace," Michael whispered, understanding. We backed away from the hearth, crowding into the far corner of the cabin. The scratching stopped, replaced by a new sound, something large sliding down the chimney. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness of the fireplace, followed by a shape that hurt to look at directly. It moved wrong, folded in ways that made my brain reject what I was seeing. But I caught glimpses. Elongated limbs, skin stretched too tight over bones that shouldn't exist. A face that was almost human but twisted into something predatory and alien. It smiled at us with Brian's teeth. "Hello, friends," it said in Brian's voice, though the words seemed to come from somewhere else, echoing strangely in the small space. "Miss me?" Sarah whimpered and pressed herself against the wall. Michael raised his hiking pole like a weapon, though his hands were shaking so badly I doubted he could hit anything. "What are you?" I asked, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "I'm exactly what I've always been," it said, stepping fully into the room. In the dim light filtering through the blocked windows, I could see that its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, fingers too many joints, legs that bent backward like a bird's. I'm hunger. I'm the cold between the stars. I'm what happens when the meat forgets its meat. It took a step toward us, and Sarah bolted. She threw herself at the window, scrabbling at the chairs we'd stacked there. The thing that had been Brian moved faster than thought, flowing across the room like spilled water. It caught Sarah by the ankle and dragged her back. She screamed, clawing at the floor, and Michael finally moved. He swung his hiking pole with everything he had, catching the creature in what should have been its ribs. The pole passed right through it. "Michael, run!" Sarah screamed as the thing lifted her off the ground. "Get out of here!" But Michael was frozen, staring in horror as the creature's face split open like a flower, revealing layers of teeth and something wet and pulsing inside. Sarah's screams cut off abruptly. I don't remember making the decision to move. One moment I was pressed against the wall in terror. The next, I was throwing my full weight against the door barricade. The table scraped across the floor, opening a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. I hit the door running and didn't look back, even when Michael started screaming behind me. The forest was full dark now, lit only by the snow that continued to fall in thick, wet flakes. I ran without direction, crashing through undergrowth and overfallen logs, my only goal to put distance between myself and the cabin. Behind me, something howled in triumph. Then the howling multiplied, became a chorus. They were hunting now, and I was the last prey. I stumbled through the forest for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. My body was running on pure adrenaline, every shadow potentially hiding death, every sound potentially the last thing I'd ever hear. That's when I saw the light. It was electric light, harsh and white, cutting through the trees ahead of me. Civilization. Safety. I ran toward it with the last of my strength, branches whipping my face and roots trying to trip me. I burst into a clearing and stopped short. There was a cabin, but not the abandoned one I'd escaped from. This one was newer, well-maintained, with solar panels on the roof and a generator humming softly beside it. Light poured from the windows, and I could see movement inside. I stumbled to the door and pounded on it with both fists. "Help! Please, somebody help me!" The door opened, and I found myself looking at an elderly man with kind eyes and a concerned expression. He was wearing flannel pajamas and slippers, and behind him I could see a woman peering around his shoulder. "My goodness, child, what happened to you?" the woman asked, hurrying forward with a blanket. "There's something in the forest," I gasped. "It killed my friends. It looked like one of them, but it wasn't. We need to call the police, the Forest Service, someone." Now, the man said soothingly, guiding me inside. "Let's get you warmed up first. Agnes, put the kettle on." The cabin was cozy and warm, with handmade quilts and the smell of wood smoke and coffee. Normal, human, safe. "My name's Jeremiah," the man said as his wife bustled around the kitchen. "This is my wife Agnes. We've been living up here for 20 years, and we've never seen anything dangerous. You sure you didn't just get spooked?" "No," I said, pulling the blanket tighter around myself. "I know what I saw. One of my friends. He changed, became something else, and there are more of them out there." Jeremiah and Agnes exchanged a look that I couldn't read. "Well," Agnes said carefully, "the woods can play tricks on a person, especially at night, when you're scared and cold." "I'm not hallucinating," I insisted. "Sarah and Michael are dead. Brian is one of those things now." "Of course, dear," Agnes said in the tone people use when they're humoring someone they think is having a breakdown. "We believe you, don't we, Jeremiah?" But Jeremiah wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking past me, toward the window. His face had gone pale. "Agnes," he said quietly, "come away from the window." I turned to follow his gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. Faces were pressed against the glass. Human faces, but wrong. Eyes too bright, smiles too wide, features that shifted and flowed like they couldn't decide what shape to hold. I recognized Sarah's face among them, and Michael's, but they were corrupted versions, mockeries of the people I'd known. And in the center, pressed against the glass like a spider, was Brian, still smiling. "Hello, Jennifer," he said, his voice somehow audible through the glass. "We've been looking for you." Agnes screamed, dropping the kettle. Boiling water splashed across the floor. "The back door," Jeremiah whispered. "There's a trail that leads to the highway. Go, now." But as I turned toward the back of the cabin, I froze. Agnes was staring at me with an expression I'd seen before, that same patient, predatory interest. Her face was beginning to shift, features flowing like melted wax. "Going somewhere, dear?" she asked in a voice like breaking bones. I looked at Jeremiah. His kind eyes had become hollow pits, and when he smiled, I could see the darkness behind his teeth. "Welcome to our family," he said. The windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and writhing shapes. I threw myself toward the back door, but hands that felt like ice grabbed my ankles. I hit the floor hard, tasting blood, and rolled onto my back to see all of them crowding around me. Sarah, Michael, Brian, Agnes, Jeremiah, and others I didn't recognize. A whole family of things wearing human faces. They were all smiling. "Don't worry," Brian said, kneeling beside me. "It doesn't hurt. Well, not for long." I closed my eyes and waited for the end. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard gunshots, 3 quick cracks that echoed through the cabin. The things around me shrieked and scattered, flowing out through the broken windows like smoke. Miss, can you hear me?" I opened my eyes to see a man in a ranger's uniform standing over me, a smoking rifle in his hands. He was real, solid and human and wonderfully, beautifully normal. "Ranger Peterson, Forest Service," he said, helping me to my feet. "We got a call about missing hikers. Are you Jennifer Williams?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Your friend made it out," he said. "Brian Wright, he's in the hospital, but he's alive. Severe hypothermia and some kind of psychological trauma, but alive. He kept talking about monsters in the woods, friends who weren't really friends. We thought he was hallucinating, but—" He looked around the destroyed cabin at the claw marks in the wood and the inhuman handprints on the walls. "Maybe not," he finished. "Sarah and Michael?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. His face darkened. "We found remains. I'm sorry." He led me outside where 2 more rangers were waiting with a helicopter. As we lifted off, I looked down at the forest that had almost been my grave. In the early morning light, it looked peaceful, beautiful even. Just trees and lakes and the first snow of winter. But I knew better now. I knew what lived in the spaces between the trees, in the places where maps became meaningless and technology failed. I knew that sometimes when people go into the wilderness, something else comes back wearing their face. Brian is still in the psychiatric ward in Ashland. The doctors say he's making progress, that the hallucinations are becoming less frequent. But when I visit him, I can see the truth in his eyes. He knows what I know, that we didn't all make it out of those woods. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling outside my apartment, I get text messages from Sarah and Michael. They're always the same. "Come back to the forest, Jen. We're waiting for you." I've changed my number 3 times. It doesn't matter. The woods remember. And they're patient. They'll wait as long as it takes. Last week, I got a new message. This one was different. "We found your address." I'm writing this in a motel room outside Madison, having abandoned my apartment and most of my possessions. I don't know where I'm going next, but I know I can't stay in one place too long. They're hunting me, and eventually they'll find me. But maybe this account will help someone else. Maybe if enough people know what's out there, they'll think twice before heading into the deep woods alone. Or maybe it won't matter. Maybe the woods will claim whoever they want regardless of warnings. All I know is that I'm tired of running, and they're getting closer. If you're reading this and I've disappeared, you'll know what happened to me. Don't come looking. Don't try to find my body. Just remember, when people go missing in the wilderness, sometimes it's not because they got lost. Sometimes it's because they found something that was already there, waiting in the dark between the trees. Something that's always been hungry. Something that's learned to wear our faces. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, near Anvil Lake in remote northern Wisconsin, during what was supposed to be a simple team-building weekend that turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. I should have known something was wrong when Sarah Rodriguez first pitched the idea during our lunch break at Midwest Digital Solutions. "Come on, guys," she'd said, spreading a worn topographical map across the break room table, her finger tracing the thin blue line of Anvil Lake. "We need to get out of Milwaukee, breathe some real air. Kevin's been bragging about his outdoor skills for months." Kevin King leaned back in his chair, that familiar cocky grin spreading across his face. Bragging. I grew up hunting these woods with my grandfather. I know every trail between here and the Michigan border. He jabbed at the map. Anvil Lake's perfect, remote enough to actually disconnect, but not so far we can't handle it. Jennifer Williams. No relation, despite sharing my last name, wrung her hands nervously. I don't know. What if something happens? We're talking about the middle of nowhere. That's exactly the point, Sarah insisted. No phones, no emails, no quarterly reports. Just us, nature, and some much-needed bonding time. Robert Johnson, our quiet accountant who rarely spoke up in meetings, surprised us all by clearing his throat. My grandmother used to tell stories about those woods, he said softly. Old Ojibwe legends. She always said there were hungry things that lived deep in the forest. Kevin scoffed. Come on, Bob. You can't seriously believe in that folklore nonsense. But I caught the way Robert's eyes lingered on the map, tracing the irregular shoreline of Anvil Lake with a troubled expression. 3 weeks later, we were loading our gear into Kevin's oversized SUV at 5 a.m. on a Friday morning. The October air bit at our faces as we secured sleeping bags and backpacks, our breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. I'd never been much of an outdoorsman. My idea of roughing it was a hotel without room service. But Sarah had been so enthusiastic about the trip that I couldn't bring myself to disappoint her. The drive took nearly 4 hours, heading north through increasingly sparse towns until we were surrounded by endless walls of maple, oak, and pine. Fall colors painted the landscape in brilliant reds and golds, but as we turned onto increasingly narrow dirt roads, the beauty felt somehow oppressive, like the forest was closing in around us. GPS is getting spotty, Kevin announced as we bounced along a rutted logging road. But don't worry, I know where we're going. That should have been our first warning. We parked at what Kevin claimed was the trailhead, though it looked more like a deer path to me, and shouldered our packs. The forest pressed in on all sides, thick with undergrowth and fallen logs. The silence was immediate and unnerving. No bird songs, no insect buzzing, just the soft crunch of our footsteps on dead leaves. How far to the lake? Jennifer asked, already breathing hard from the weight of her pack. Maybe 2 miles, Kevin replied, consulting his compass. We'll be there by noon, plenty of time to set up camp. But noon came and went, and still we trudged through identical-looking forest. The trees seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Trails that Kevin swore were heading north according to his compass somehow led us in circles. This doesn't make sense, he muttered, stopping to study the map for the dozenth time. We should have hit the lake an hour ago. By 3 o'clock, with the autumn sun already slanting low through the canopy, we finally emerged at the shores of Anvil Lake. But something was wrong. The water was too dark, almost black, and it stretched much farther than the map indicated. An oily sheen covered the surface, and the opposite shore was lost in hazy distance. This isn't right, Robert said quietly. The lake's supposed to be maybe half a mile across. Kevin's confidence had evaporated. He kept checking and rechecking his compass, tapping the face like it might be broken. Must be magnetic interference from iron deposits in the rocks. We set up camp on a small clearing about 50 yards from the water's edge. The site felt wrong somehow. Too quiet, too still. Even the normal sounds of wind through leaves seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As darkness fell with unsettling swiftness, we gathered around our campfire. Kevin had struggled to get it lit, the matches seeming to sputter and die in the windless air. When flames finally caught, they burned an odd blue-green color that cast strange shadows on our faces. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" Jennifer whispered, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She was right. The complete absence of night sounds. No owls, no rustling of small animals, no splash of fish in the lake created an unnatural silence that pressed against our eardrums. Robert stared into the unusual flames, his face grave. My grandmother told me about places like this. She called them hungry grounds, places where something old and evil waits. What kind of something? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice light, but I heard the tremor underneath. Wendigo, Robert said simply. Cannibalistic spirits that were once human. They say the hunger never leaves them, and they're always searching for fresh meat. Kevin forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow in the oppressive silence. Great ghost stories, Bob, but let's keep this scientific. Weird acoustics, unusual mineral deposits in the water, there's rational explanations for everything. That's when we heard the first scream. It came from across the impossible expanse of lake, a sound that seemed to combine human agony with something far more primal. The cry echoed and distorted across the water, stretching for nearly 30 seconds before fading into silence. We all froze, straining our ears, but the forest had swallowed the sound completely. Probably just a loon, Kevin said, but his voice cracked slightly. They can sound almost human sometimes. None of us believed him. Sleep that night was fitful and filled with strange dreams. I kept waking to the sound of something large moving through the underbrush around our campsite, but every time I unzipped my tent to look, nothing was there. Just that unnatural silence and the feeling of invisible eyes watching from the darkness. Morning brought little relief. Our food had spoiled overnight, fresh supplies turning rancid and covered with an oily black mold that hadn't been there when we'd stored everything in sealed containers. The coffee grounds looked like they'd been mixed with dirt and small bones. "This is impossible," Sarah said, poking at what had been trail mix 12 hours earlier and was now a writhing mass of decay. Food doesn't rot this fast, especially not in October. Kevin's GPS unit was completely dead, its screen showing nothing but static. His compass spun wildly, never settling on any particular direction. The printed map we'd brought now showed our lake as a tiny pond, though the massive body of water stretched to the horizon in front of us. "We need to get out of here," Jennifer said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Something's very wrong with this place." But when we tried to retrace our steps, the trail had vanished. Trees that we distinctly remembered passing now stood in different configurations. Landmarks had shifted or disappeared entirely. After 3 hours of hiking in what should have been the direction back to the car, we found ourselves at the lakeshore again. "We're going in circles," Robert observed with eerie calm. "Just like the stories say, the Wendigo doesn't let anyone leave its territory." By the third day, our situation had become desperate. We were down to a few granola bars and some water from the lake that tasted like metal and decay. The unnatural silence had been joined by other wrongness, shadows that moved independently of their objects, a sun that seemed to track across the sky too slowly, and the growing certainty that something was hunting us. That's when Sarah volunteered to gather firewood. "I'll just go a little way into the forest," she said, shouldering a small hatchet we'd brought for cutting kindling. "Stay together and keep the fire burning. If I'm not back in an hour, come looking." We watched her disappear into the tree line, her red jacket bright against the autumn foliage. For 45 minutes we heard the occasional sound of her chopping wood, the steady rhythm somehow comforting in the oppressive silence. Then the chopping stopped. We waited another 15 minutes before Kevin and I went to look for her, leaving Jennifer and Robert by the fire. We followed the sound of her work, finding a small pile of cut branches and the hatchet driven deep into a fallen log. But no Sarah. "Sarah!" Kevin called, his voice echoing strangely in the dense forest. "Where are you?" A rustling in the underbrush to our left made us turn. Sarah emerged from behind a massive pine tree, moving with an odd, stilted gait. Her red jacket was now torn and dirty, and something dark stained the front of her shirt. "Found some good wood," she said, but her voice was wrong. Too flat, too emotionless. She held up a few small branches with movements that seemed slightly off, like a marionette controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Kevin frowned. Are you okay? You look pale." Sarah smiled, but it was all wrong. Her lips stretched too wide, revealing too many teeth, and the expression didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes that had sparkled with enthusiasm just days before now stared with the flat, hungry emptiness of a predator. "I'm fine," she said, that horrible smile never wavering. "Just tired. Let's go back to camp." The walk back felt endless. Sarah followed behind us, her footsteps oddly silent on the leaf-covered ground. When I glanced back, she was always exactly the same distance away, that terrible smile fixed on her face like a mask. Jennifer noticed immediately that something was wrong. "Sarah, what happened to your jacket?" "Caught it on a branch," Sarah replied, still smiling that too wide smile. Clumsy me. But Robert was staring at her with growing horror. "That's not Sarah," he whispered, backing away from the fire. The thing wearing Sarah's face turned that awful smile on him. "Of course it's me, Bobby. Who else would it be?" "Sarah's lactose intolerant," Robert said, his voice shaking. "She's been complaining about it for 2 years, but you just drank my coffee with cream in it without hesitation." The creature's smile faltered for just a moment, and in that instant, I saw something ancient and hungry flicker behind Sarah's stolen eyes. "I'm just really thirsty," it said, but the voice was changing, becoming deeper, more guttural. Kevin stepped forward, still not understanding. "Sarah, you're scaring everyone. What's going on?" The thing lunged. Whatever was wearing Sarah's skin moved with inhuman speed and strength. Kevin barely had time to throw up his arms before claws that had burst through Sarah's fingertips raked across his chest, sending him stumbling backward into the fire. His screams filled the unnatural silence as flames caught his jacket. Jennifer was shrieking, scrambling away from the creature that had been our friend. Robert grabbed a burning branch from the fire, wielding it like a weapon. The Wendigo, because that's what it had to be, threw back its head and howled. The sound was nothing human, a mixture of rage and hunger that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sarah's face was changing, stretching and distorting as the thing underneath clawed its way to the surface. Kevin rolled in the dirt, beating at his burning clothes. The smell of singed hair and fabric filled the air. The Wendigo turned toward him, moving on legs that bent wrong, its stolen face now a twisted mockery of our friend. "Run!" Robert shouted, swinging his makeshift torch at the creature. It recoiled from the flames with a shriek of fury. I grabbed Jennifer's hand and we fled into the forest, leaving Kevin's agonized screams behind us. Branches tore at our clothes and faces as we crashed through the underbrush in blind panic. Behind us, I could hear the Wendigo pursuing, its passage marked by the sound of snapping branches and an inhuman keening that made my teeth ache. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, finally collapsing behind a massive fallen tree. In the distance, Kevin's screams had stopped. The forest had returned to its awful silence. "It got him," Jennifer sobbed against my shoulder. "Oh God, it killed Kevin." I held her close, trying to quiet her sobs. Every sound felt like a beacon guiding the monster to us. My mind raced, trying to process what I'd witnessed. The thing had looked like Sarah, moved like Sarah, but underneath, the stories were true, I whispered. Robert's grandmother's stories. It's a Wendigo. Hours passed in terrified silence. As darkness fell, we could see the distant glow of our campfire still burning. Occasionally, shadows moved across the light, tall, elongated shapes that suggested the Wendigo was still there, waiting. "We can't stay here," I finally said. "We need to get back to Robert, get our supplies." Jennifer shook her head frantically. "We can't go back there. That thing is waiting." But thirst and hunger were already taking their toll. We had no choice. We crept through the forest using the fire as our guide, moving from tree to tree like infantry advancing through enemy territory. As we got closer, I could smell something cooking, meat roasting over the flames. My stomach clenched with both hunger and revulsion as I realized what the Wendigo might be feeding on. From behind a cluster of pine trees, we could see our campsite. The Wendigo sat by the fire, still wearing Sarah's face but with her features stretched and distorted like a funhouse mirror reflection. It was methodically feeding pieces of what looked like charred meat into its gaping mouth, chewing with sounds like breaking bones. Robert was nowhere to be seen. His tent was collapsed, the fabric torn to shreds. Dark stains covered the ground around where it had stood. The Wendigo suddenly stopped eating and lifted its head, nostrils flaring. Even from 30 yards away, I could see its borrowed eyes scanning the tree line. It was hunting for our scent. "It knows we're here," Jennifer breathed against my ear. The creature stood with fluid grace, Sarah's body moving in ways no human skeleton could accommodate. It began walking toward our hiding spot with deliberate steps, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I grabbed Jennifer's hand and we ran again, crashing through the forest as branches whipped our faces and roots tried to trip us. The Wendigo's pursuit was relentless but strangely methodical, as if it was hurting us somewhere specific. We stumbled into a small clearing and froze. Scattered around the open space were bones. Old bones, bleached white by years of exposure. Human skulls grinned up at us from beds of fallen leaves. This was a feeding ground, a place where the Wendigo had been bringing its prey for decades. The creature emerged from the tree line behind us, no longer bothering to maintain Sarah's appearance. Her face had elongated into a canine snout filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. Her arms had stretched, fingers becoming talons that scraped against her thighs as she walked. The red jacket hung in tatters from a frame that was too tall, too thin, too wrong. "Hungry," it spoke with Sarah's voice, but the word came out as a wet, slobbering growl. "Always so hungry." I picked up a femur bone from the ground, hefting its weight. It wasn't much of a weapon against a supernatural predator, but it was all we had. The Wendigo circled us slowly, never taking its eyes off our faces. It was savoring this moment, the fear radiating from its trapped prey. "You taste different when you're afraid," it said, licking its lips with a tongue that was far too long. Sweeter, more tender. Jennifer pressed against my back, her breathing rapid and shallow. I could feel her heart hammering against my shoulder blade. The attack came without warning. The Wendigo moved faster than physics should allow, crossing the clearing in a single bound. I swung the bone with everything I had, connecting with its skull with a wet crack. The impact jarred my arms to the shoulder, but the creature barely staggered. Its claws raked across my chest, shredding my jacket and the skin underneath. Pain exploded through my nervous system as I stumbled backward, warm blood soaking my shirt. Jennifer screamed and grabbed a burning branch that had somehow followed us from the campfire. She thrust it at the Wendigo's face, and the creature recoiled with a shriek of rage and pain. For just a moment, Sarah's features reasserted themselves, her eyes clearing with confused terror. "Michael!" she gasped, her voice weak and human. "What's happening to me?" But the moment passed. The Wendigo's features flowed back like water, and those alien eyes fixed on Jennifer with renewed hunger. I tackled it from the side, driving my shoulder into what had been Sarah's ribs. We went down in a tangle of limbs and claws, rolling across the bone-littered ground. Its breath was the stench of rotting meat and ancient death. The creature was impossibly strong, but its elongated limbs gave me some leverage. I managed to pin one arm while Jennifer brought the burning branch down again and again, each impact releasing the smell of burning hair and flesh. The Wendigo bucked beneath me with inhuman strength, finally throwing me clear. I hit a tree trunk hard enough to see stars, sliding down to the ground as my vision went dark around the edges. Through the haze, I saw Jennifer backing away from the creature, still wielding her makeshift torch. The Wendigo was burned and bleeding, but far from defeated. It stalked toward her with predatory patience. That's when Robert appeared. He came out of the forest like an avenging spirit, carrying what looked like a spear made from a broken tent pole. Without hesitation, he drove the makeshift weapon deep into the Wendigo's back. The creature spun with a roar of pain and fury, backhanding Robert across the clearing. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up, but his attack had given me the opening I needed. I struggled to my feet and grabbed another bone from the ground, this one with a jagged, broken end. The Wendigo turned back toward Jennifer, dismissing me as no longer a threat. It was the last mistake it would make. I drove the broken bone into the side of its neck with every ounce of strength I had left. The point punched through whatever passed for flesh on this thing, releasing a spray of black ichor that burned where it touched my skin. The Wendigo's howl of agony shattered the unnatural silence of the forest. It clawed at the bone protruding from its neck, staggering in circles as more of that burning blood poured from the wound. "The fire!" Robert gasped from where he lay. "They fear fire. Send it back to the hungry darkness." Jennifer still held her burning branch. With a cry of desperate courage, she lunged forward and thrust the flames directly into the Wendigo's face. The effect was immediate and devastating. The creature erupted in flames that burned wrong, too bright, too hot, with colors that shouldn't exist. Its stolen features melted away like wax, revealing something underneath that my mind refused to properly process. Ancient, alien, hungry beyond all reason. The Wendigo stumbled backward, consumed by impossible fire, until it reached the edge of the clearing. With one final, ear-splitting shriek, it collapsed into a burning heap that turned to ash in seconds, leaving nothing but scorched earth and the lingering stench of sulfur. The forest's unnatural silence broke like a dam bursting. Birds began singing in the distance. Wind rustled through leaves. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called with beautiful, haunting music. We helped Robert to his feet, checking him for serious injuries. He was battered and bruised, but alive. The three of us stood in that bone-littered clearing, covered in blood and ash, barely believing we'd survived. "How did you escape?" I asked him. Robert grimaced, touching his ribs gingerly. "When that thing attacked Kevin, I ran. Found a hollow log to hide in. Been tracking you ever since, waiting for a chance to help." "What happened to Kevin?" Jennifer whispered. We all knew the answer, but none of us wanted to say it out loud. The walk back to our campsite revealed the truth. Kevin's remains lay scattered around the fire, picked clean. The Wendigo had been feeding on him when we'd watched from the trees. We didn't bury him. Couldn't bring ourselves to touch what was left. Instead, we gathered our surviving gear and started walking. This time, the forest seemed normal again. Trails led in consistent directions. Our compass pointed steadily north. By late afternoon, we found the logging road and Kevin's SUV. The drive back to Milwaukee passed in shocked silence. What do you say after witnessing something that shouldn't exist? How do you explain to the police that your co-worker was consumed by a cannibalistic forest spirit that possessed your other co-worker? We agreed on our story before reaching civilization. Kevin had fallen into the campfire during a night of heavy drinking. Sarah had wandered off during a mental breakdown and never returned. Search and rescue teams would find no trace of her, of course. The Wendigo had burned to ash, taking her stolen appearance with it. The authorities accepted our account with sympathetic skepticism. Tragic camping accidents happen more often than people realize, especially when alcohol is involved. Search teams spent 3 days combing the area around Anvil Lake but found nothing. No trace of Sarah, no evidence of the supernatural encounter that had nearly killed us all. I quit my job at Midwest Digital Solutions 2 weeks later. Jennifer transferred to the Portland office. Robert disappeared entirely, leaving only a resignation letter that mentioned returning to his grandmother's reservation to learn the old protections. That was 6 months ago. I still wake up screaming some nights, reliving the sight of that thing wearing Sarah's face. Jennifer calls sometimes, always after midnight, and we talk about normal things while carefully avoiding any mention of what happened in the forest. The doctors say I have PTSD from the trauma of losing my friends. They prescribe medication and therapy, treating symptoms they don't understand. How do you explain to a rational medical professional that you've seen absolute evil wearing a human face? That, somewhere in the remote forests of Wisconsin, Ancient hungers still prowl among the trees. I've done research since then, diving deep into Ojibwe folklore and historical accounts of Wendigo encounters. The stories go back hundreds of years. Indigenous warnings about cannibal spirits that haunt the deepest wilderness. Most anthropologists dismiss them as cultural metaphors for the dangers of isolation and starvation. They're wrong. The Wendigo is real. It's patient, it's hungry, and it's still out there. Sometimes, late at night when the city seems too quiet, I catch myself listening for that familiar, unnatural silence. I check my locks twice, keep flashlights by every door, and never, ever venture into wooded areas after dark. Because I know the truth that Kevin learned too late, that Sarah discovered in her final moments of clarity. Some things in this world are older than civilization, hungrier than any natural predator, and utterly without mercy. The Wendigo is waiting in the darkness between the trees, wearing the faces of the lost, calling to new prey with voices of trust and friendship, and it's always, always hungry. I tell myself I'm safe here in the city, surrounded by concrete and steel and electric lights, but on cold October nights when the wind howls between buildings, I sometimes catch a scent on the air that reminds me of that cursed lake, metal and decay, ancient hunger. On those nights, I don't sleep at all, because somewhere in the deepest woods of northern Wisconsin, something that was once my friend Sarah Rodriguez is still walking among the trees, smiling that terrible smile, waiting for the next group of lost travelers to stumble into its domain. The Wendigo never lets go of what it takes, and it never stops hunting. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 23 years old. This happened in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin, 3 miles east of the Flambeau River, where the pines grow so thick that noon feels like twilight. I should have listened to the warnings. The plan was simple enough, a weekend camping trip with my college buddies before we all scattered to our post-graduation lives. Kevin King, my roommate since freshman year, had insisted we needed one last adventure before the real world claimed us. Brandon Edwards, always the outdoorsman, had suggested the remote section of forest his grandfather used to hunt. Jessica Davis, the only one of us with actual wilderness experience, had reluctantly agreed after we promised to follow her safety protocols. This isn't some state park with marked trails and ranger stations, Jessica had warned us during our planning session. The Chequamegon-Nicolet is over 1 million acres. People disappear out there. But we were 23 and invincible, armed with REI gear and YouTube survival knowledge. What could go wrong? We drove up from Madison on a Friday afternoon in October, when the leaves painted the forest in brilliant reds and golds that would have been beautiful if I'd known what was waiting for us. Brandon's beat-up Jeep Cherokee handled the increasingly rough forest roads with ease, taking us deeper into wilderness that seemed to swallow civilization whole. "Turn left at the next deer trail," Brandon called from the driver's seat, consulting a hand-drawn map his grandfather had sketched decades ago. "There's a clearing about 2 miles in where we can set up camp." The GPS on my phone had lost signal 20 minutes earlier. Jessica's, too. Even Kevin's expensive satellite communicator showed nothing but static. "Probably just the tree cover," Kevin said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there when we started. The clearing, when we found it, was perfect in that way that should have been our first warning. A circle of level ground surrounded by towering white pines and sugar maples, with a small creek bubbling along one edge. The kind of place that looked like it belonged on a postcard advertising Wisconsin's natural beauty. "My grandfather called this place Geechee Manitou," Brandon said as we unloaded our gear. "Said the old Ojibwe avoided it." "What's that mean?" Jessica asked, already scanning the tree line with the methodical attention that had made her our designated wilderness guide. Brandon shrugged. "Something about spirits. He was always full of stories about the old days." We set up camp in the center of the clearing, 4 tents arranged in a rough square around a fire pit Brandon constructed from stones he'd pulled from the creek. The work kept us busy until the sun began to sink behind the pines, and that's when I noticed the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but the complete absence of sound that comes when every living thing decides to hold its breath. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the creek seemed to muffle its voice to barely a whisper. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" I asked as we sat around the fire that evening, the flames casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach too far into the darkness. "It's peaceful," Kevin said, but he kept glancing over his shoulder toward the tree line. Jessica said nothing, just stared into the fire with an expression I couldn't read. She'd been unusually subdued since we'd arrived, checking and rechecking our supplies with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. "Tell us one of your grandfather's stories," she said to Brandon, "about this place." Brandon fed another log to the fire, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-filled sky. He said there was something that lived in these woods, something that was always hungry. The Ojibwe had a name for it: Wendigo, a cannibalistic spirit that could possess people, drive them mad with hunger for human flesh. "Wendigo," Jessica corrected quietly. "I've heard that one. It's supposed to be 15 feet tall, gaunt as a skeleton but impossibly strong. They say it smells like death and moves without making a sound." The way she said it, matter-of-fact and clinical, made my skin crawl more than Brandon's dramatic storytelling ever could. "Just legends," Kevin said, but his voice cracked slightly. "Native American folklore to explain unexplained disappearances and incidents." "Maybe," Jessica said, "but my grandfather was Menominee. He always said the stories exist for a reason." That night, I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the unnatural silence beyond our tent walls. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something, or think I heard something, moving just outside the ring of our dying firelight. Footsteps that sounded too deliberate, too purposeful to be animals. But when I unzipped my tent flap to look, there was never anything there, just the darkness between the trees, deeper and more complete than any darkness I'd ever experienced. I must have eventually fallen asleep because I woke to the sound of Jessica screaming. It was still dark, the dead hour before dawn when the world feels most fragile. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and burst from my tent to find Jessica standing by the cold remains of our fire, her face pale in the beam of her flashlight. "The food," she gasped. "All of it. It's gone." She was right. Our entire food supply, 3 days' worth of carefully planned meals, had vanished. Not just taken, but destroyed. Packages of freeze-dried camping food were scattered around the campsite, torn open and emptied. Our cooler had been opened and its contents dumped on the ground, but nothing had been eaten. Just wasted. "Bear," Kevin suggested weakly, but we all knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't open coolers and then leave the food to rot. "Look at this," Brandon called from the edge of the clearing. He was crouched beside a tree, his flashlight beam focused on something carved into the bark. Deep gouges formed symbols I didn't recognize, fresh enough that sap still wept from the wounds. "We need to leave," Jessica said. "Now. This isn't random vandalism or animal activity." But when we tried to start the Jeep, it wouldn't turn over. Brandon popped the hood to reveal that someone, or something, had torn out essential components of the engine. Wires hung like severed arteries and the battery terminals had been yanked completely free. "We're 15 miles from the nearest road," Brandon said, his voice hollow. "And that's if we don't get lost." "Then we hike out," Jessica said. "We've got enough water for a day, maybe 2 if we're careful. And there are berries, edible plants if you know what to look for." We broke camp quickly, packing only essentials. The plan was to follow the creek downstream until it met the Flambeau River, then follow the river south to the main forest road. Simple navigation that should have been foolproof. It wasn't. The creek led us deeper into the forest instead of toward civilization. Paths that had been clear the day before seemed to shift and change when we weren't looking directly at them. Jessica's compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north, and always, there was the sensation of being watched. "This is impossible," Jessica muttered, studying her topographic map for the dozenth time. "We should have reached the river hours ago." The sun was setting again, though it felt like we'd been walking for days instead of hours. Time seemed elastic in the deep woods, stretching and contracting in ways that made my head hurt to think about. "We need to make camp," Brandon said. "I'll gather firewood while there's still light." "Don't go alone," Jessica warned, but Brandon was already disappearing into the trees with his hatchet. We waited and waited. When Brandon didn't return after an hour, we went looking for him. We found his hatchet buried in a pine tree 20 yards from where we'd last seen him, as if he'd been swinging it at something and missed, but there was no sign of Brandon himself. "Brandon!" Kevin called, his voice echoing strangely in the forest. "Brandon, where are you?" The echo came back wrong, distorted, as if something else was calling his name along with us. We searched until full darkness made it too dangerous to continue, then huddled around a small fire Kevin managed to build with matches from his emergency kit. None of us slept. We just sat and listened to the sounds that weren't quite animal, weren't quite human, moving through the darkness just beyond our circle of light. Brandon came back at dawn. He walked into our camp as if nothing had happened, carrying an armload of firewood and wearing the same clothes he'd been wearing when he disappeared. But something was wrong. Fundamentally, horribly wrong. "Hey guys," he said, and his voice was Brandon's voice, but the rhythm was off. The inflection, like someone doing an impersonation of Brandon based on half-remembered conversations. "Where the hell were you?" Kevin demanded, jumping to his feet. "We looked everywhere." Brandon smiled, and that was when I knew for certain that whatever had come back to us wasn't our friend. The smile was too wide, showing too many teeth, and his eyes. His eyes were black from lid to lid, like pools of oil reflecting our firelight. "I got lost," Brandon said in that not-quite-right voice, "but I found my way back. I always find my way back." Jessica was backing away slowly, her hand moving toward the knife on her belt. She could see it too, the wrongness that wore Brandon's face like an ill-fitting mask. "Brandon," she said carefully, "what's your middle name?" The thing that looked like Brandon tilted its head at an angle that was just slightly too far to be human. "Michael," it said. Brandon's middle name was James. The creature lunged at Jessica with inhuman speed, but she was ready. Her knife caught it in the shoulder, drawing black blood that smoked when it hit the ground. The thing that wore Brandon's face screamed, a sound like breaking glass and tearing metal that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Run!" Jessica shouted, and we ran. Behind us, Brandon's voice followed us through the trees, calling our names in that wrong rhythm, promising he just wanted to talk, wanted to explain, wanted us to come back so we could all be together forever. The forest had become a maze designed to trap us. Paths led in circles. The sun seemed to move backwards across the sky. And always, the thing wearing Brandon's face followed us, calling our names with his stolen voice. We ran until Kevin collapsed from exhaustion, his face gray and slick with sweat. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't run anymore." That's when we heard it. The real sound of the thing pursuing us. Not Brandon's stolen footsteps, but something else entirely. A sliding, scraping noise like massive claws dragging across stone. And underneath that, a sound that might have been breathing if breathing could echo and multiply until it filled the entire forest. "It's shed the disguise," Jessica whispered. "That means it's done playing with us." The Wendigo emerged from between the trees like a nightmare given form. 15 feet tall, skeletal but possessed of terrible strength, its yellowed bones visible through skin like dried parchment. Its face was a skull crowned with antlers, and its eyes burned with a hunger that could never be satisfied. The smell hit us like a physical blow. Rot and decay and something worse than death. It moved with impossible silence despite its size, flowing through the forest like smoke given terrible substance. And when it spoke, It was with Brandon's voice coming from that skull face, cheerful and conversational as if nothing had changed. "Come on, guys. Let's head back to camp. I've got a great story to tell you." Kevin screamed and ran, just turned and bolted into the trees without looking back. The Wendigo's head swiveled to track his movement with predatory focus, then it smiled with Brandon's stolen expression and gave chase. Kevin's screams cut off abruptly. "This way," Jessica hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me deeper into the forest. "There's supposed to be a ranger station about 5 miles north of here. If we can reach it—" But the forest wouldn't let us reach it. Every path led us in circles, back to the clearing where we'd first made camp. The Wendigo was herding us, playing with us like a cat with wounded mice. When we stumbled back into the clearing for the third time, the creature was waiting for us. It sat beside the cold remains of our fire, wearing Brandon's form again, but no longer bothering to hide the wrongness. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at impossible angles, and when it smiled, its teeth were like broken glass. "I missed you," it said in Brandon's voice. "It gets so lonely out here, so hungry." "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Everything," it said simply. "Your flesh, your memories, your voices. I want to wear you like clothes until nothing of you remains but the echo of your screams." Jessica stepped forward, and I saw she was holding something in her hand, a small leather pouch she'd pulled from her backpack. "My grandfather gave me this," she said to the creature, "said it would protect against spirits like you." The Wendigo laughed with Brandon's voice, but the sound was wrong, layered with harmonics that made my teeth ache. "Superstition," it said. "Dead beliefs for a dead people." Jessica opened the pouch and scattered its contents, what looked like herbs and small bones, in a circle around us. The Wendigo's laughter cut off abruptly. "Iron filings," Jessica said. "Sage, and something else my grandfather never told me the name of. He said it came from the heart of the old forest, from before the Wendigo claimed this place." The creature that wore Brandon's face snarled and stepped toward us, then recoiled as if it had struck an invisible wall. Where its foot had touched the circle of scattered herbs, the ground smoked. "Clever girl," it hissed. "But circles break. They always break." It began to pace around us, and with each circuit I could feel the protection weakening. Whatever Jessica had scattered was powerful, but it wasn't meant to hold something like this for long. "The ranger station," Jessica whispered urgently. "If we can get there, there might be a radio, a way to call for help." "How? We're trapped." She pulled out her compass, and for the first time since we'd entered the forest, the needle pointed steadily north. "The protection isn't just keeping it out," she said. "It's breaking its hold on this place. But not for long." The Wendigo sensed the change too. Its pacing became more frantic, and cracks began to appear in Brandon's stolen face, revealing the skull beneath. "When I say run," Jessica whispered, "follow the compass north and don't stop for anything." "What about you?" "Someone has to break the circle from inside. Give you a head start." "Jessica, no. Run!" She kicked apart the circle of herbs, and immediately the forest's wrongness came flooding back. But in that moment of transition, when the Wendigo's power was disrupted, we had our chance. I ran north, following the compass needle through trees that no longer shifted and changed. Behind me, I heard Jessica scream, a sound that cut off far too quickly. I wanted to turn back, wanted to help her, but I could already hear the Wendigo coming after me, moving through the forest with that terrible sliding sound. The ranger station was exactly where Jessica had said it would be. A small log building with a radio tower and a generator that still had fuel. I burst through the door and grabbed the radio, praying it would work. "Mayday, Mayday, this is an emergency. I'm at the Northern Ranger Station in Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. People are dead. Something is hunting us." Static answered me. Then, impossibly, Brandon's voice came through the radio. "Michael, thank God you're safe. Where are the others?" I nearly answered before I realized the trick. The Wendigo had followed me to the station, and now it was trying to lure me outside. "I know you're out there," I called through the door. "I know what you are." Brandon's voice hurt and confused. "What are you talking about, man? It's me. I've been looking for you guys all night." I turned off the radio and tried the landline phone mounted on the wall. Dead. The generator was running, but something had cut the external lines. That's when I heard scratching at the walls. Long, deliberate scratches like claws testing the strength of the logs. The building shuddered with each impact, and I realized the Wendigo was circling the station, looking for a way in. "Let me in, Michael," it called in Kevin's voice now. "I'm hurt. It killed the others, but I got away. Please, man, I'm bleeding." I pressed my back against the far wall and tried to think. The station had weapons, a rifle and a box of ammunition in a locked cabinet. But the key was missing, and I was no good with locks. The scratching stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard the soft sound of the door handle turning. I had locked it when I came in, but now the lock was clicking open, one tumbler at a time. The Wendigo didn't need to break down doors when it could simply undo them. The door swung open, and Brandon walked in. Not the twisted thing that had been hunting us, but Brandon exactly as he had been when we arrived. Normal proportions, normal movements, normal voice. "Hey, Mike," he said. "Found you." But I could smell the wrongness now, that scent of death and decay that followed the creature wherever it went. And when Brandon stepped into the light from the emergency lantern, I saw that his shadow was wrong. Instead of his human silhouette, the shadow on the wall was antlered and skeletal. "I know you're not Brandon," I said. It tilted its head and smiled with too many teeth. "Does it matter? I have his memories now, his voice, his face. In every way that counts, I am Brandon Edwards." "Where is he? The real Brandon?" "Safe," it said. "Preserved. I can show you if you'd like." The thing wearing Brandon's face gestured toward the open door, and for one horrible moment, I could see them. Brandon, Kevin, and Jessica, standing in the darkness beyond the station. They looked normal, unharmed, but they stood too still and their eyes reflected the light like an animal's. "Join us," they said in unison, their voices perfectly synchronized. "We're having such fun." I grabbed the emergency flare from the wall mount and ignited it, flooding the station with brilliant red light. The Wendigo recoiled, and its stolen faces melted away like wax, revealing the skull beneath. "Iron," I gasped, remembering what Jessica had said. "You can't stand iron." The station was full of it, nails in the walls, tools in the maintenance kit, even the hinges on the door. I grabbed a hammer from the tool rack and held it like a weapon. The Wendigo laughed, a sound like grinding bones. "Clever. But iron only slows me. It doesn't stop me." It was right. Already I could see it adapting. The skull face solidifying into something that could tolerate the presence of metal. Jessica's grandfather's protection had been temporary, and this would be too. But temporary might be enough. I smashed the radio with the hammer, then destroyed the phone for good measure. If I couldn't call for help, at least I could prevent the creature from using them to lure other victims. Then I turned to the generator. "What are you doing?" the Wendigo asked, genuine curiosity in its voice. "Making sure you stay hungry," I said, and brought the hammer down on the fuel line. Gasoline sprayed across the floor, and I touched the emergency flare to it. The station erupted in flames that drove the Wendigo back into the forest with a shriek like tearing metal. I ran. The fire behind me lit up the forest like a beacon, and maybe, just maybe, someone would see it and come to investigate. I followed the compass north, then east when I hit the river, staying in the water where the creature couldn't track my scent. I walked all night and into the next day, following the Flambeau River downstream until I finally stumbled onto State Highway 70. A trucker found me there, dehydrated and raving about monsters in the forest. The search and rescue teams never found any trace of Brandon, Kevin, or Jessica. The official report blamed exposure and wild animals, suggested that stress and exhaustion had caused me to hallucinate the more extreme details of my story. but I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can still hear them calling my name from the deep places of the forest. Brandon's voice, Kevin's laughter, Jessica's warnings, all of them promising that if I just come back, we can all be together again. The Wendigo is still hungry, and it's still waiting. I moved to Arizona after that, as far from the northern forests as I could get. I tell people I'm allergic to pine trees now, which isn't exactly a lie. But sometimes, even in the desert, I catch a whiff of that smell. Death and decay and something worse than hunger. That's when I know it's found me again. That's when I know it's time to run. My name is James Anderson, and I am 29 years old. This happened in October of last year, deep in the Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin, about 15 miles southeast of the tiny logging town of Glidden. Emily and I had been planning this anniversary trip for months, 3 days of backcountry camping to celebrate our 2 years together. We'd chosen the most remote section we could find on the map, a place where the old logging roads petered out into deer trails and the cell towers couldn't reach. I should have known something was wrong from the moment we parked at the rusted gate marking the end of Forest Road 166. The air hung too still for October, thick and humid like August, and the trees, mostly towering white pines and paper birch, seemed to lean inward, creating a green-black tunnel that swallowed the trail ahead. Emily stood beside our beat-up Honda Civic, adjusting the straps on her burgundy backpack, her auburn hair catching the last filtered sunlight. "You sure about this place?" she asked, squinting at the hand-drawn map the clerk at Glidden's only gas station had sketched for us. He said something about it being different this time of year. I laughed, trying to shake off the unease that had been growing in my chest since we'd turned onto the unmarked dirt road an hour ago. Different how? More beautiful? More peaceful? I shouldered my own pack, feeling the familiar weight of our tent, sleeping bags, and 3 days' worth of food. "Come on, Em. When's the last time we had real solitude? No neighbors, no traffic, no cell service," she finished, waving her phone. "Dead zone, just like you wanted." The trail wound through dense underbrush for the first mile, forcing us to duck under low-hanging branches that seemed to grab at our hair and clothes. The forest floor was carpeted with decades of pine needles, creating a spongy surface that muffled our footsteps until each breath felt unnaturally loud. I kept checking my GPS, but the little blue dot kept jumping around erratically, sometimes showing us a quarter mile off the trail, sometimes placing us in the middle of a lake that didn't exist. "Technology," I muttered, stuffing the device back into my pocket. "Good thing we've got the paper map." But when I unfolded it again, the pencil lines seemed fainter than before, and I couldn't quite match the landmarks to what we were seeing. The clerk had marked a small clearing beside Fisher Creek about 3 miles in, perfect for our campsite, but we'd been hiking for almost 2 hours and hadn't heard running water yet. Emily stopped suddenly, her head tilted. "Do you hear that?" I listened, but the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, no insects buzzing. Even the wind had died, leaving us in a pocket of absolute stillness that made my ears ring. "Hear what?" I thought. She shook her head, auburn curls bouncing. "Never mind, probably just my imagination." We pushed deeper into the woods as the afternoon wore on. The trees grew larger and closer together, their massive trunks scarred with old claw marks that I tried to convince myself came from bears marking territory. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a thin mist began to rise from the forest floor, carrying with it the smell of decay and something else, something sweet and cloying that reminded me of overripe fruit. It was nearly sunset when we finally heard water trickling somewhere ahead. We broke through a wall of young birch trees and found ourselves in a circular clearing about 50 feet across, with a narrow creek running along the eastern edge. The water was dark, almost black, reflecting the deepening sky like a mirror. "This has to be it," Emily said, but she didn't sound convinced. She pulled out the map again, frowning. though it looks bigger on paper." I dropped my pack with relief, my shoulders aching from the weight. "Close enough. Besides, look at this place." I gestured at the ring of massive pines surrounding us, their tops disappearing into gathering darkness. "It's perfect." But even as I said it, something felt wrong about the clearing. The grass was too green for October, and perfectly circular, as if someone had mowed it recently. More unsettling were the stones scattered around the perimeter, dark, smooth rocks about the size of dinner plates, placed at regular intervals like markers. They looked ancient, covered in patterns that might have been natural erosion but resembled crude symbols. Emily noticed them too. "Weird rocks. Think they're some kind of old Indian burial ground?" "Native American," I corrected automatically, then wished I hadn't. The last thing we needed was to get spooked by our own imaginations. And no, probably just glacial deposits. This whole area was under ice 10,000 years ago. We set up camp quickly as the light faded, our familiar routine bringing some comfort. Emily laid out the ground sheet while I assembled our two-person tent, the bright orange fabric a cheerful splash of color against the darkening trees. We gathered fallen branches for a fire ring, though I noticed the wood felt strangely damp and heavy, as if it had been soaking in water for days. The fire took longer to start than usual. I went through half a box of matches before the kindling finally caught, and even then the flames sputtered and hissed, producing an unusual amount of thick gray smoke that hung in the still air instead of rising. When it finally got going properly, the flames burned with an odd blue-green tint that made Emily's face look pale and sickly. "Must be minerals in the wood," I said, though I'd never seen anything like it. We cooked dinner over the strange fire, just freeze-dried beef stew rehydrated with creek water, but the food tasted off, slightly metallic with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach turn. Emily ate a few spoonfuls before pushing her bowl away. "I'm not very hungry," she said. "Maybe just tired from the hike." As darkness settled fully over the clearing, the silence became oppressive. I'd expected the usual nighttime sounds: owls hooting, small animals rustling through the underbrush, maybe the distant howl of coyotes. Instead, we sat in a bubble of absolute quiet, broken only by the occasional pop and hiss from our fire. "It's so quiet," Emily whispered, as if speaking at normal volume might shatter something fragile. I nodded, feeling increasingly uneasy. "Maybe we're scaring the wildlife. They'll get used to us." But even as I said it, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The creek had stopped running. The gentle trickling sound that had led us to this clearing was gone, and when I shined my flashlight toward the water, it sat perfectly still, like black glass. We went to bed early, zipping ourselves into our sleeping bags as the fire died down to glowing coals. Emily curled against me, her breathing gradually slowing as she drifted off. But I lay awake for hours, staring up at the tent ceiling. Through the thin orange fabric, I could see the shapes of tree branches swaying in a wind I couldn't feel, and occasionally, shadows that moved in ways that didn't match any branch I'd seen. Sometime deep in the night, I was awakened by Emily stirring beside me. I kept my eyes closed, thinking she was just getting comfortable, but then I heard the soft whisper of the tent zipper being pulled down. "Em?" I whispered. "You okay?" No response. I opened my eyes and saw her sleeping bag was empty. The zipper opened from the inside. The tent flap hung open, letting in cold air that carried that same sweet, rotten smell from earlier. I grabbed my flashlight and crawled outside. "Emily?" The clearing was empty except for the dying embers of our fire. My light swept across the ring of trees, but there was no sign of her. I called her name louder, then again, until I was shouting, but my voice seemed to be absorbed by the massive pines before it could travel far. Panic rising in my throat, I circled the clearing, looking for any sign of where she'd gone. The ground was too hard and covered with pine needles to show footprints, but near the eastern edge, close to the silent creek, I found something that made my blood run cold. Her pajama top, the soft blue cotton shirt she'd been wearing, hung from a low branch about chest height, perfectly intact but with 3 long tears running from collar to hem, as if it had been sliced by claws. Below it, dark stains spotted the ground, and the sweet smell was stronger here, mixed now with something metallic and familiar. Blood. I crashed through the undergrowth following what might have been a trail, calling Emily's name until my throat was raw. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I stumbled over roots and ducked under branches, creating a nauseating strobe effect that made every shadow look like a lurking threat. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I heard something that stopped me dead. Laughter, soft and musical, drifting through the trees from somewhere ahead. Emily's laugh. I followed the sound, my heart hammering against my ribs. The laughter came again, closer now, but there was something wrong with it. Too high, too pure, like the sound of wind chimes in a hurricane. It led me in a wide circle through the dense forest until, impossibly, I found myself back at our clearing. Emily stood beside the fire ring, her back to me, wearing her pajama bottoms but no top. Her bare shoulders gleamed pale in the moonlight, and she was perfectly still, unnaturally still, like a mannequin. Emily. I approached slowly, my flashlight beam trembling. Jesus, I've been looking everywhere for you. Are you hurt? I found your shirt. She turned around. The thing wearing Emily's face smiled at me with too many teeth, each one filed to a sharp point. Her eyes were completely black, reflecting my flashlight beam like an animal's, and when she opened her mouth to speak, that sweet, rotten smell poured out like fog. "Hello, James," she said in Emily's voice, but with an odd rhythm, as if she was remembering how to form each word. "I went for a walk." "Where's your shirt?" I managed to ask, though every instinct was screaming at me to run. Her smile widened impossibly, the corners of her mouth stretching until they nearly reached her ears. "I don't need it anymore. I'm not cold. Are you cold, James?" She took a step toward me, and I noticed she was walking wrong. Not quite toe to heel, more like someone who'd never used legs before and was still figuring out the mechanics. Her movements were too fluid, as if her joints bent in directions they shouldn't. "I'm fine," I said, backing away. "Maybe we should get some sleep. It's late." "Yes," she agreed, but made no move toward the tent. "Sleep is good. I've learned so much about sleep, about dreams, about the things that live in them." She tilted her head at an impossible angle, nearly 90 degrees, and I heard something pop in her neck. "Do you want to know what I learned, James?" I turned and ran. I crashed through the forest in blind terror, branches whipping my face and roots catching my feet. Behind me, I could hear that terrible laughter again, but now it was coming from multiple directions at once, as if Emily, or the thing wearing her face, was somehow keeping pace with me from several places at the same time. My flashlight died without warning, plunging me into absolute darkness. I stumbled forward, hands outstretched, until I collided with something solid and rough. Tree bark. I felt my way around the massive trunk and crouched in the roots, trying to control my breathing and listen for pursuit. The forest had returned to its unnatural silence. No laughter, no footsteps, no sound at all except my own ragged breathing and the hammering of my heart. I waited there for what felt like hours, until my legs cramped and my teeth started chattering from the cold. When pale gray light finally began to filter through the trees, I realized I had no idea where I was. The massive pine I'd been hiding behind looked like every other massive pine in the forest, and I couldn't see the clearing or any familiar landmarks. Worse, my phone was back in the tent, along with the map and most of our supplies. I chose a direction that felt like east and started walking, hoping to find the trail, or at least Fisher Creek. The morning mist was thick enough that I could barely see 10 feet ahead, and every shadow looked like Emily's twisted smile waiting for me. After an hour of stumbling through identical-looking forest, I heard the sound of running water. I followed it to a narrow creek that might have been Fisher Creek, or might have been some other waterway entirely. The current was moving fast, carrying foam and debris that looked suspiciously like pieces of fabric. I followed the creek downstream, and gradually the trees began to thin. The mist lifted, revealing a landscape that didn't match anything I remembered from our hike-in. Instead of the dense pine forest, I was walking through a more open area dotted with birch trees and thick undergrowth. In the distance, I could see what looked like a road. The road turned out to be Forest Road 166, but I was at least 5 miles south of where we'd parked the car. It took me 2 hours of walking on pavement to reach our Honda, and when I did, I found Emily sitting on the hood, fully dressed and apparently unharmed. "James!" She jumped down and ran to me, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Oh my God, where have you been? I woke up and you were gone. I've been waiting here for hours." I held her at arm's length, studying her face carefully. Her eyes were their normal hazel color, and when she smiled, her teeth looked perfectly normal. But something was still wrong. She was too clean, for one thing. No dirt on her clothes, no twigs in her hair, no sign that she'd spent the night in the wilderness. "You don't remember?" I asked. "Remember what? I woke up in the tent around sunrise and you were gone. I looked for you for a while, then came back here to wait. I figured you'd gone for an early hike or something." She frowned, seeming genuinely confused. "Why? What do you remember?" I wanted to tell her about the thing in the clearing, about the impossible laughter and the filed teeth, but the Emily standing in front of me seemed so normal, so much like herself, that I began to doubt my own memories. Maybe I'd had some kind of breakdown. Maybe the isolation and the strange atmosphere of the forest had triggered some sort of panic attack or waking nightmare. "I couldn't sleep," I said finally. "Went for a walk and got turned around in the dark. Must have wandered for hours before I found the road." She kissed my cheek, and her lips felt warm and familiar. "Poor baby. No wonder you look like hell. Come on, let's go home." The drive back to Madison should have taken about 3 hours, but every time I checked the clock on the dashboard, it seemed like no time had passed at all. Emily chatted normally about work and her sister's upcoming wedding, but I found myself watching her out of the corner of my eye, looking for signs that something was wrong. It was small things at first. She blinked too infrequently, holding her eyes open for 30 or 40 seconds at a time. When she laughed at something on the radio, the sound was just slightly off-pitch, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. And she kept smiling, not constantly but more often than usual, and the expressions lingered a beat too long. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked as we pulled into our apartment complex. "Never better," she said, and that smile stretched across her face again. "I feel like a whole new person." Over the next few days, the wrongness became more pronounced. Emily went to work at the marketing firm where she'd been employed for 3 years, but when I called to check on her, her colleagues said she'd been acting strangely, forgetting the names of long-term clients, staring blankly during meetings, ordering raw hamburger for lunch from the cafeteria. At home, she moved through our apartment like she was seeing it for the first time, picking up familiar objects and examining them with fascination. She spent an hour studying our toaster, turning it over in her hands and pressing the buttons repeatedly. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was learning how things work. She stopped eating cooked food. I'd find her in the kitchen at odd hours, gnawing on raw chicken or tearing into packages of ground beef with her fingernails. When I confronted her about it, she claimed not to remember, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of amusement, as if she was enjoying some private joke. The final straw came a week after our return. I woke up around 3 in the morning to find Emily's side of the bed empty. I got up to look for her and found her standing in our living room, perfectly still, staring at the wall. She'd been there for who knows how long, and when I touched her shoulder, she was ice cold. "Emily?" She turned to face me, and in the dim light from the street lamps outside, I saw that familiar too-wide smile spread across her face. "Hello, James," she said in that same careful cadence I'd heard in the forest. "I was just thinking about our camping trip. Such good memories." "Come back to bed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "In a moment. I'm not tired. I don't get tired anymore." She tilted her head, and I heard that same unsettling pop in her neck. "Do you know what I am, James?" My blood turned to ice water. "You're Emily. You're my girlfriend." "No," she said, and her voice was changing, becoming deeper and more guttural. "Emily is gone. Emily was delicious. Emily screamed so beautifully when I peeled her skin away piece by piece." The thing wearing Emily's face began to change. Her skin grew pale and stretched tight over bones that were suddenly too large. Her hair fell out in clumps, revealing a skull covered in mottled gray skin. Her fingernails extended into black claws, and when she smiled now, I could see rows of razor-sharp teeth extending far back into her throat. "I am what your people call Wendigo," she continued, her voice now a rasping whisper. "I have been hungry for so long, James. So very long. But Emily was just the appetizer." I ran for the door, but she moved faster than anything human had a right to move. Her claws raked across my back, shredding my t-shirt and leaving burning lines of pain across my shoulder blades. I stumbled forward, crashed into our coffee table, and rolled behind the couch as she lunged again. "Run, if you like," she said, and now her voice was coming from multiple directions at once, just like in the forest. "I enjoy the chase. Emily tried to run too, at the end. Would you like to know what she said before I silenced her forever?" I didn't want to know, but she told me anyway, in Emily's own voice. She said, "Please don't hurt James. Please let him live." Such love, such devotion. I savored every moment of her terror. Rage overcame fear. I grabbed the heavy pewter candlestick from our mantel and swung it at the thing's head as hard as I could. It connected with a sickening crunch, and it stumbled backward, black blood pouring from a gash in her skull. The Wendigo hissed and swiped at me with those terrible claws, but I was already moving, diving for the kitchen where I knew Emily kept a set of expensive German knives. I grabbed the biggest one, a 10-inch chef's knife, and spun around just as the creature lunged at me again. The blade sank deep into its chest, and it let out a shriek that sounded like fingernails on glass mixed with the screaming of dying animals. Black blood sprayed across our kitchen walls, and the thing staggered backward, clawing at the knife handle. "Iron!" it gasped, its voice cycling through different tones and accents. Emily's voice. Then a man's. Then something that might have been a child's. "Cold iron burns. How did you know?" I hadn't known. Pure luck. But I pressed my advantage, grabbing the cast iron skillet from the stove and bringing it down on the creature's head again and again until it collapsed to the kitchen floor, twitching and making sounds like a broken radio cycling through stations. It took a long time to die. As it did, its form kept shifting. Sometimes Emily, sometimes a gaunt figure with gray skin and black eyes, sometimes something that looked like it had once been human but had been stretched and twisted into an impossible shape. When it finally stopped moving, it looked like a stranger. A skeletal man with long, matted hair and clothes that might have been fashionable 50 years ago. I called the police, but how do you explain something like this? I told them Emily had been attacked by an intruder, that I'd fought him off, but she was already dead. They found the body, of course, but no trace of Emily. The forensics team was baffled by the black blood and the fact that the corpse appeared to have been dead for decades, mummified despite the fresh wounds. They eventually ruled it death by misadventure. A vagrant who had somehow gotten into our apartment and attacked Emily, then died from his injuries after I fought back. The lack of Emily's body was explained as the work of accomplices who had disposed of her remains. Case closed. But I know the truth. The real Emily died in that clearing in the Chequamegon National Forest, torn apart by something that had been waiting in those ancient woods for God knows how long. Something that fed on human flesh and could wear the faces of its victims like masks. I never went back to look for her remains. What would be the point? But sometimes, late at night, I dream about that clearing with its circle of strange stones and its too green grass. In the dreams, Emily is there, standing by the dark water of Fisher Creek, wearing that terrible smile and calling my name. And sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night or sitting in my new apartment in a different city far from Wisconsin, I catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. A familiar silhouette, auburn hair catching the light, moving just a little bit wrong. The Wendigo is dead. I killed it with iron and determination and sheer desperate fury, but I can't shake the feeling that there were others in those woods, others who might have tasted Emily's terror and found it as sweet as her flesh. I don't camp anymore. I don't even like to go outside after dark, because sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is still and the air carries that faint scent of decay and overripe fruit, I can hear laughter drifting through the darkness. Emily's laughter. And it's getting closer. The town of Glidden, Wisconsin, still exists, of course. I looked it up online, driven by a compulsion I can't fully explain. Forest Road 166 is marked on official maps, though it's listed as seasonally closed, authorized vehicles only. The gas station where we got directions burned down 3 months after our trip, electrical fire, they said, though the clerk who gave us that hand-drawn map was never found. I've read everything I can find about Wendigo folklore, about the Chippewa legends that spoke of cannibalistic spirits that roamed the deep forests of the Great Lakes region. The descriptions match what I encountered almost perfectly. Creatures of perpetual hunger that could wear the faces of their victims, beings of winter and famine that drove men mad with their very presence. What I can't find is any record of other incidents in the Chequamegon National Forest. No missing hikers, no unexplained deaths, no reports of unusual animal attacks. It's as if that place exists in a pocket outside normal reality, waiting for the occasional lost souls who wander too far from the marked trails. I've moved 4 times since that night in Madison, always to bigger cities, always to places where the lights never really go out, and the sounds of civilization drown out any whispers that might drift in from the wild places. But geography doesn't matter, not really, because the thing that wears Emily's face isn't bound by distance or time. It's bound to me now, tethered by guilt and grief and the terrible knowledge of what I failed to protect. Dr. Reeves, my therapist, says it's survivor's guilt manifesting as hallucinations. She prescribes pills that dull the edges of everything but don't touch the core of what I know to be true. Emily is dead, torn apart by something ancient and hungry in the deep woods of Wisconsin. And the thing that killed her isn't finished with me yet. Because sometimes, in the early hours of morning when sleep deprivation blurs the line between waking and dreaming, I can feel teeth at my throat and claws raking across my skin. I can smell that sweet, rotten breath and hear Emily's voice whispering secrets about the taste of human fear. The Wendigo is patient. It has all the time in the world, and it knows that eventually, inevitably, I'll make a mistake. I'll be caught alone in the dark, or I'll let my guard down for just a moment too long. And when that happens, it will finish what it started in that cursed clearing beside the silent water of Fisher Creek. My name is James Anderson, and I am 29 years old. This happened in October of last year, but in all the ways that matter, it's still happening. Every night, every shadow, every moment when the familiar world seems just slightly wrong. The hunger in the pines is patient, and it's still hunting.